Stabilizers are
The
failing.
compass is useless. How are we supposed to navigate this storm?
Can you imagine living the same day 3 times on a cruise ship while everyone insists it never happened? The Pacific Northwest's mysterious waters have witnessed encounters that shatter reality. From passengers falling into synchronized trances near glaciers to crew members hiding disturbing secrets in restricted zones. Tonight, we're exploring 10 documented accounts from real people whose voyages became nightmares. These aren't legends. These are experiences that left witnesses permanently changed. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Drop your location in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed to Mr. Nightveil, and if you're ready for stories that will haunt you long after they end, let's dive into the unknown. My name is Liv. I'm 34 years old, and I make my living as a freelance nature photographer based out of Portland, Oregon. And what I'm about to tell you defies every logical explanation I've tried to construct over the past 6 months since it happened. But I have the files to prove at least part of it, even if those files raise more questions than they answer. I booked myself on a week-long October cruise aboard the Pacific Explorer, a mid-sized vessel running the inside passage route from Seattle up to Ketchikan, specifically timing it to capture the orcas during their fall migrations and the absolutely stunning foliage that transforms the islands into this patchwork of burnt oranges and deep reds against the steel-gray waters. National Geographic was considering a series I'd pitched on Pacific Northwest marine ecosystems, and I needed portfolio pieces that would make editors stop scrolling. The kind of images that grab you by the throat and don't let go. So this cruise represented not just a vacation, but potentially a career-defining opportunity that I'd saved 8 months to afford. The first 2 days were exactly what I'd hoped for. Clear skies transitioning into those dramatic cloud formations that photographers dream about. And I'd already captured some incredible shots of humpback whales breaching near the San Juan Islands. But it was the third morning, October 14th to be exact, when we were passing through the waters near Orcas Island, that everything changed. I woke up at 4:47 a.m. I remember because I always set my alarm for pre-dawn shoots. And when I stepped out onto the observation deck with my time-lapse rig, the fog was so thick you could barely see 15 feet beyond the ship's railing. The kind of dense Pacific Northwest fog that seems to muffle sound itself and makes you feel like you've stepped outside of normal reality. Most passengers would have gone back to bed disappointed. But for me, this was perfect. The way fog interacts with early light creates this ethereal quality that you simply cannot replicate in post-processing. So I set up my Canon EOS R5 with the intervalometer programmed to capture 1 frame every 8 seconds for the next 6 hours. Mounted it on my carbon fiber tripod with the gimbal head I'd specifically brought for ship-based photography. Angled it at about 35 degrees downward to capture both the water's surface and anything that might break through it. What would you do if your camera saw something your eyes couldn't? Something that shouldn't exist in waters you thought you knew. I went back to my cabin around 6:30 a.m. to grab breakfast and warm up. The October temperatures up there hover around 48 to 57 degrees Fahrenheit. And standing on an exposed deck in fog for 2 hours will chill you straight through no matter how many layers you're wearing. I returned around 9:15 a.m. to check the camera, made sure the battery hadn't died and the memory card wasn't full. Then left it running until just past noon when the fog had finally burned off enough to reveal the rocky coastline of the islands. Dramatic, sure, but by then the magical quality of the morning light was gone. That evening, back in my cabin after dinner, I transferred all the files to my laptop. We're talking about 2,700 individual raw images from that single time-lapse sequence alone. And I started the process I always do, scrubbing through them at high speed in Lightroom to identify the keepers, the frames where the light did something special or the composition aligned perfectly. I was about 40 minutes into the review, maybe 800 frames in, when I noticed something in frame 847 that made me stop, rewind, and look again. Because there in the water, maybe 60 feet from the ship's hull, was a dark shape just beneath the surface, not breaking through, but visible as this mass of deeper black against the already dark gray-green water. At first, I thought it was a whale. We'd seen several the previous days. But when I advanced frame by frame, I realized this shape was moving in a way that felt wrong. Too deliberate, too consistent in its speed relative to the ship, like it was pacing us rather than just happening to swim in the same direction. I jumped forward 30 frames, and it was still there. Same relative position, then another 50 frames, still there. And my heart started doing this thing where it beats too fast, but also feels like it's skipping beats. Because I was beginning to understand that this thing, whatever it was, had followed our ship for what the timestamps indicated was at least 43 minutes straight without deviating from its course or depth. I spent the next 4 hours going through every single frame from that morning's shoot, marking each one where the shape appeared. And by the time I finished, it was past 2 a.m., and I had identified 891 images, spanning from frame 623 to frame 1889, that showed this entity pacing the Pacific Explorer through fog-shrouded waters, which, according to my intervalometer's timing, meant this thing had followed us for nearly 2 hours and 48 minutes. I tried every rational explanation I could think of, a submarine running parallel to us. But we were in waters that were too shallow in some sections and the shape moved too organically, a whale or orcapod. But the size was too consistent and too large. At least based on the scaling references I could establish using the ship's hull dimensions, which I knew from the vessel specifications, this thing was easily 80 to 95 feet in length, far larger than even the biggest humpback whales, which max out around 52 feet. I enhanced the images, played with the exposure and shadow recovery, used every trick I'd learned in 15 years of professional photography, and while I could make out more detail, what I saw didn't clarify anything. It made everything more confusing, because the edges of this shape weren't organic. They had these angles that seemed almost geometric in places, like architecture rather than biology. The next morning, I showed the images to another passenger, a retired engineer from Vancouver named Daphne, who I'd been chatting with at dinner. And she looked at my laptop screen for maybe 30 seconds before saying it was probably just a shadow effect from the fog. Light refraction playing tricks on the camera sensor, which made no sense given my technical explanations, but she seemed uncomfortable with the whole conversation and excused herself quickly. I approached the ship's naturalist, a woman in her 50s who'd been leading the wildlife identification talks, and she barely glanced at the images before dismissing them as likely a gray whale feeding pattern. Even though gray whales don't pace ships at consistent depths and speeds for nearly 3 hours. And I could tell from her body language, she just wanted me to stop talking about it. That's when the isolation really started to sink in. This feeling that I had documented something genuinely unexplainable, but existed in this space, where I was the only one who seemed to care or believe it mattered. I became obsessed with capturing it again. I'll admit that. I started setting up my time-lapse rig every single morning at 4:30 a.m., regardless of weather conditions, checking the water constantly during the day with my 400mm telephoto lens, annoying other passengers by monopolizing the best observation spots on deck. By day 6, we were approaching the waters near Princess Louisa Inlet, this stunning fjord on the British Columbia coast that's about 6 kilometers long and surrounded by these massive granite cliffs that drop nearly straight down into water that's 179 meters deep in places. A landscape that feels ancient and indifferent to human presence. The inlet is accessible only by boat. You have to navigate through Malibu Rapids, which at spring tide can have currents of 9 knots. And our ship was scheduled to spend the evening anchored near the entrance, so passengers could take smaller boat tours up to see Chatterbox Falls in the morning. I set up my equipment that final evening around 7:15 p.m. Positioned on the upper observation deck with a clear view of the inlet's mouth and the darkening water beyond. The October sunset at that latitude happens around 6:22 p.m. So we were already in that deep blue twilight that photographers call the magic hour. This time, I wasn't just running time-lapse. I had my video camera going as well, a Sony a7S III that excels in low-light conditions, because I'd realized that if this thing appeared again, I needed multiple recording formats, multiple types of evidence that couldn't be dismissed as easily as still images. The air temperature had dropped to maybe 45 degrees, and I could see my breath. But I barely noticed because around 8:47 p.m., according to both cameras' metadata, the water near the inlet's entrance started to show this disturbance. Not waves exactly, but a disruption in the surface pattern that spread outward in a way that indicated something massive moving beneath. Then it surfaced, not completely, but enough that for approximately 8 to 9 seconds I had clear visual confirmation, and both cameras captured it in sharp detail. Because by this point, the ship had turned on its exterior lights, which reflected off the water. What broke the surface wasn't biological. I can state that with absolute certainty. It had this quality that I can only describe as architectural, with edges and surfaces that caught the light in ways that suggested metal or stone rather than skin or scales. And the portions I could see before it submerged again had this pattern that reminded me of buttresses or support structures, geometric and clearly constructed rather than evolved. The whole thing was massive, based on the reference points I could establish with the inlet's entrance width, which I knew from my pre-trip research was about several hundred meters across. I estimate what surfaced was at least 40 meters of a much larger structure, and when it went back under the displacement, created a wave pattern that rocked our ship enough that several passengers came out on deck asking what had happened. I stood there shaking, not from cold, but from the sheer, impossible reality of what I'd just witnessed and captured. And I immediately started reviewing the footage on both cameras' screens right there on deck, confirming that, yes, it was recorded. Yes, the detail was there. Yes, I finally had evidence that couldn't be explained away as shadows or whales or equipment malfunction. I downloaded everything to 3 separate drives that night. My primary portable SSD, a backup mechanical drive, and an SD card that I kept in a separate location from my other equipment, because by this point, I'd developed this paranoid certainty that something would happen to prevent me from sharing what I'd found. The next morning, our final day before returning to Seattle, I requested a meeting with the ship's captain, explaining that I'd captured footage of an unidentified object or structure in the water near Princess Louisa Inlet, and felt it should be reported to the appropriate maritime authorities. The captain, a Norwegian man in his early mid-60s who'd been professional but distant the entire voyage, agreed to see me in his office around 10:30 a.m. And I brought my laptop with the primary footage file already queued up, ready to show him those crucial 8 seconds of clear imagery. But when I opened the file, when I clicked play with him standing right there watching the screen, the video was corrupted. Not the whole file, but specifically those 8 seconds, replaced with this digital artifacting that made it look like the footage had been damaged. Green and purple blocks of distorted pixels that rendered it completely useless as evidence. I tried the time-lapse images from that same sequence, and they opened fine. But the resolution and the angle meant you could see something was there, but couldn't make out the architectural details that had been so clear in the video footage. Just this dark mass breaching the surface that could be interpreted as almost anything if you wanted to be skeptical. The captain looked at what I could show him, those unclear stills that I knew didn't prove what I was claiming. and I could see in his expression this mixture of pity and impatience, like I was just another passenger who'd gotten overexcited about something mundane and wasted his time with conspiracy theories. He thanked me for bringing it to his attention, said he'd make a note in the ship's log, and essentially dismissed me. And I walked back to my cabin feeling this crushing weight of frustration and confusion. Because I knew what I'd seen, I knew what I'd captured, and yet the one piece of evidence that would have made everyone believe was gone. I still have the low-resolution backup files, the time-lapse sequences showing the shape following us for hours, the unclear images from that final night showing something surfacing near Princess Louisa Inlet. And I've spent 6 months since getting back, analyzing every frame, sending files to colleagues, posting in marine biology forums under pseudonyms, asking for identification help. No one has an explanation that fits all the evidence, the size, the movement patterns, the architectural quality of what surfaced. And I've learned that several other photographers and passengers on Pacific Northwest cruises have reported similar sightings over the years, always in deep water, always in fog or low-light conditions, always with this same frustrating lack of conclusive proof. National Geographic passed on my series, said the images were intriguing, but lacked the scientific documentation necessary for publication, which felt like a diplomatic way of saying they didn't want to risk their reputation on something this weird. I still have those files. I back them up obsessively. And sometimes, late at night, I open them and scroll through frame by frame, looking at this dark shape pacing beneath the surface of the Pacific. This thing that followed the Pacific Explorer for nearly 3 hours on a foggy October morning near Orcas Island. And I wonder if it's still out there, still following ships through those cold northern waters, still surfacing occasionally near remote inlets, where only a handful of people might see it, and even fewer will be believed when they try to tell others what they witnessed. I met another photographer named Amiri at a gallery opening 3 months after I got back. And when the conversation turned to our recent work, I mentioned the cruise almost casually, testing the waters. And something in her expression shifted. This recognition that made my pulse quicken. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos from her own Pacific Northwest cruise 2 years earlier. Time-stamped images showing the exact same dark shape beneath foggy waters near the Gulf Islands, the same geometric edges, the same impossible size. And we stood there, in that crowded gallery, surrounded by chattering people discussing art and wine. Both of us understanding that we'd witnessed something that connects us in a way no one else could understand unless they'd seen it too. We exchanged contact information, and now we're part of this small, unofficial network of photographers and passengers who've documented similar encounters, comparing notes, analyzing footage, trying to find patterns in the sightings. And while we still don't have definitive answers about what's down there in those deep Pacific waters, at least I'm no longer alone in knowing that something is. My name is Cooper. I'm 29 years old, and I teach high school history in Vancouver, which means I spend most of my days trying to make teenagers care about events from centuries ago. But what happened on my honeymoon 3 months back is something I can't explain using any historical context or rational framework I've ever learned. My wife Malaysia and I had just gotten married on September 23rd, a small ceremony with close friends and family at a garden venue in Richmond. And we were on a tight budget because we'd both been saving for a down payment on a house. So instead of some expensive tropical destination, we booked a 3-day budget cruise on the Pacific Dream, one of those smaller vessels that does quick loops around the Gulf Islands, Vancouver to Victoria, and back through Canadian waters. It seemed perfect for us. Romantic enough for a honeymoon, but affordable. And Malaysia had always loved the Gulf Islands, the way the September light hits those rocky shores and turns everything golden. So we were genuinely excited when we boarded on September 26th with our single suitcase and backpack. holding hands like the newlyweds we were. The Pacific Dream isn't one of those massive cruise ships you see in commercials. It's more intimate, maybe 200 passengers max, with narrow corridors and cabins that are functional but cramped. And when we found our room, cabin 347 on the lower deck, my first impression was that it smelled weird. Not like mildew or cleaning products exactly, but something I couldn't quite identify, sort of metallic and stale at the same time. Malaysia noticed it too, wrinkled her nose as we stepped inside. But we laughed it off because, honestly, what do you expect from a budget cruise? And we were determined to have a good time regardless of any minor inconveniences. The cabin itself was maybe 120 square feet. A narrow bed pushed against one wall, a tiny bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a single porthole window that looked out onto the gray-blue water of the Strait of Georgia. We unpacked our few belongings, hung up Malaysia's dress and my one decent shirt in the closet that was really just an alcove with a bar. And that's when Malaysia said she felt cold, which was strange because the cabin thermostat was set to 72 degrees, and it was actually pretty warm. I put my arm around her, and she leaned into me. But I noticed she was looking around the cabin with this expression I'd never seen on her face before. Somewhere between nervous and confused. And when I asked what was wrong, she said she just had this feeling that something was off. Like we weren't alone, even though obviously we were. I kissed her forehead and told her it was probably just first-day jitters, new environment, being on a ship, all that. And she smiled and agreed, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like someone just left? Like you missed them by seconds? That first night we had dinner in the main dining room. Nothing fancy but decent food, salmon and roasted vegetables. And we met some other couples who were also doing the Gulf Islands route, retirees mostly, friendly people who asked about our wedding and gave us unsolicited marriage advice that we nodded along to politely. By the time we got back to cabin 347, around 9:30 p.m., it was fully dark outside. Our porthole just showed blackness and our own reflections. And Malaysia went to brush her teeth while I checked my phone for messages. That's when I heard her call my name from the bathroom. Not scared exactly, but urgent. And I found her crouched down next to the nightstand, which was really just a small shelf built into the wall between the bed and bathroom door. She dropped her toothbrush, and when she bent down to pick it up, she'd noticed something wedged in the tiny gap between the nightstand and the wall, and she'd managed to pull it out with her fingers, a small spiral-bound notebook, the kind you'd buy at any drugstore, with a purple cover that was bent and stained. We sat on the bed together and opened it, and the first page had a name written in neat handwriting at the top. Cheyenne, no last name, and just Cheyenne. And below that, a date from 3 weeks prior, September 5th. The early entries were normal, typical vacation diary stuff. Observations about the weather and the food and other passengers. Nothing that seemed unusual or concerning at first glance. But as we flipped through the pages, which spanned what appeared to be a 3-day cruise identical to ours, the tone started to shift in ways that made my stomach clench. Entries getting shorter and more fragmented, less about the cruise activities and more about the cabin itself. September 6th. Woke up at 3 a.m., swear I heard someone in the cabin, but door was locked from inside, probably just ship noises. Then later, things aren't where I left them. My sweater was on the chair, but now it's on the bed. I don't remember moving it. And by September 7th, they're coming in at night. I know they are. I can feel it. The crew has keys. They can come in whenever they want. Malaysia and I exchanged glances, and I could see her face had gone pale in the cabin's fluorescent lighting. And I tried to make a joke about it. Said maybe it was a creative writing exercise or something someone left behind as a prank. But my voice came out wrong, too forced, because the truth was, those entries were genuinely unsettling. We kept reading, couldn't help ourselves, and the final entries from September 7th deteriorated into barely coherent fragments. They move everything. They watch me sleep. I pretend to sleep, and I can hear them breathing, standing over the bed, breathing. Why won't anyone believe me? The crew says I'm imagining things, but I know. The last entry was just, there in the walls. That was it. No conclusion, no signature. Just those 4 words, and then blank pages for the rest of the notebook. And Malaysia closed it with shaking hands and said we should give it to someone, maybe the front desk or ship security, because clearly whoever Cheyenne was had experienced some kind of mental health crisis and might need help. I agreed immediately, relieved to have a plan of action. And we went up to the main desk on the promenade level where a tired-looking crew member was sorting through paperwork. I explained that we'd found a journal in our cabin from a previous passenger and wanted to return it in case they were looking for it. Handed him the purple notebook and told him the name Cheyenne was written inside. He took it, flipped through it quickly without really reading anything, and then said there was no passenger named Cheyenne on any recent cruise, that he'd been working the desk for the past month and would remember that name. I insisted, said the dates were right there in the notebook, September 5th through 7th, just 3 weeks ago. Showed him the first page where she'd written it clearly. He looked at me with this expression that was hard to read, something between annoyed and uncomfortable, and said the manifest for that cruise had been filed and there was definitely no Cheyenne. Maybe someone had brought the notebook from home and accidentally left it. Malaysia asked if we could see the manifest, just to check, and he got defensive. Said passenger manifests were private information and he couldn't just show them to anyone who asked. But he'd keep the notebook in lost and found in case anyone claimed it. We went back to cabin 347, feeling more unsettled than before, because his reaction seemed off. Too dismissive, too quick to shut down the conversation. We decided to just try to sleep. It was past 11 p.m., and we had an early excursion booked for Victoria in the morning. I'm not sure what time I woke up. My phone was charging across the cabin, and I couldn't see it without getting out of bed. But it was still completely dark outside the porthole, so probably somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m. Malaysia was asleep next to me. I could hear her breathing. And I was about to close my eyes again when I realized what had woken me up. There was a sound, very faint, like fabric rustling, coming from near the closet area. I lay there frozen, listening, trying to convince myself it was just the ship's movement or the ventilation system. But then I heard it again, deliberate, rhythmic, like someone going through clothing very slowly. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought Malaysia would wake up from the sound of it. And I forced myself to reach over and turn on the small reading light above the bed. And the cabin flooded with dim yellow light that showed absolutely nothing out of place. Closet door closed. No one there. Except, and this made my breath catch, Malaysia's dress, the one she'd worn to dinner, the one I'd watched her hang up in the closet before we went to bed, was now draped over the chair by the tiny desk area. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it, wondering if, maybe, I'd misremembered where she'd put it. But I had a clear memory of her hanging it up because she'd made a comment about how the hangers were too small. I got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Malaysia, and checked the closet. And sure enough, there was an empty hanger swinging slightly, like something had just been removed from it. I checked the cabin door, locked from the inside with the chain we'd fastened before bed, porthole latched, bathroom empty. And yet somehow, that dress had moved. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, just sat in the chair watching the cabin get lighter as dawn approached, watching Malaysia sleep peacefully, unaware. and trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. When she woke up around 6:30 a.m., I told her everything, showed her the dress on the chair, and she went quiet in a way that scared me more than if she'd gotten upset. She said she needed to tell me something, that she'd also woken up during the night, had felt like someone was standing at the foot of the bed watching us, had opened her eyes and seen nothing but couldn't shake the feeling of a presence. That morning in Victoria, we went through the motions of tourism, walked around the inner harbor, took photos in front of the Parliament buildings, had breakfast at a cafe. But both of us were distracted, exhausted from lack of sleep and rattled by what had happened. We got back to the ship around 4 p.m., and I went straight to the front desk to request a cabin change. Told them we were experiencing issues with noise and temperature. The same crew member from the night before, I learned his name was Josiah, checked his computer and said the ship was completely booked. Every cabin occupied. There was nothing available. I asked if we could at least speak to someone about what had happened. Someone in management or security, because we'd found that journal and now were experiencing exactly the kind of things it described. Josiah's expression changed, hardened, and he said in a low voice that I needed to stop making accusations, that the crew took their jobs seriously and would never enter a passenger's cabin without permission except in emergencies. Malaysia grabbed my arm before I could respond, pulled me away from the desk, said it wasn't worth it. We just had one more night, and then we'd be home. That final night, neither of us really tried to sleep. We took turns staying awake in shifts, watching the cabin, watching each other. And it was during Malaysia's watch around 2:30 a.m. that she woke me up by shaking my shoulder hard. I opened my eyes to find her pointing at the bathroom, and I looked and saw that our toiletries, which we'd arranged on the small shelf above the sink, had been rearranged into a different pattern, lined up by height instead of the random cluster we'd left them in. We both got up and checked everything, and that's when we found other changes. My shoes by the door were now paired neatly instead of kicked off carelessly. The blanket on the bed was folded at the corner in a crisp triangle we definitely hadn't done. Someone or something had been in our cabin while we sat there in the dark, had moved through our space touching our things, and we hadn't heard a sound, hadn't felt anything. And the door was still locked and chained from the inside. We spent the remaining hours until dawn, sitting together on the bed with all the lights on, not talking much, just holding hands and waiting for it to be over. When we disembarked in Vancouver on September 28th, we practically ran off the ship. Didn't even wait for the organized departure, just grabbed our bag and pushed through the crowd. For weeks after, we tried to find information about Cheyenne, searched cruise passenger databases and missing persons reports, even called the cruise line's corporate office to ask about incidents on the Pacific Dream in early September. We got nowhere. Everyone insisted there was no record of any passenger named Cheyenne, no incidents reported, no complaints filed. But I still have that journal. I keep it, even though part of me wants to burn it. And sometimes late at night, I take it out and read those deteriorating entries, and I wonder if Cheyenne was mentally ill like everyone implied, or if something about cabin 347 makes you see things, feel things, makes you paranoid. Or maybe, and this is what keeps me awake some nights, maybe Cheyenne was completely sane and accurately documenting something that really happens in that cabin, something the crew knows about but can't or won't stop. And now Malaysia and I are part of that same pattern. 2 more people who experienced it and have nothing but our testimony and a purple notebook that officially doesn't belong to anyone. My name is Andy. I'm 52 years old. And I've spent the last 25 years of my life studying marine ecosystems in some of the deepest, most remote parts of the Pacific Ocean. Which means I've seen things that most people only encounter in documentaries or textbooks. but what I witnessed on a 10-day educational cruise through the Salish Sea this past July defies every scientific principle I've built my career on. And the way it was handled afterward has shaken my faith in the institutions I've dedicated my life to serving. I was hired as a guest lecturer for the Ocean Voyager, a mid-sized vessel that specializes in educational cruises, the kind where passengers pay a premium to attend talks by scientists and naturalists while touring scenic waterways. And this particular voyage was running from Seattle through Puget Sound, around the Olympic Peninsula, and ending in Astoria, Oregon, covering some of the most biologically diverse waters in the Pacific Northwest. The cruise company had contacted me through my university. They wanted someone who could speak authoritatively about deep-sea bioluminescence and the unique marine life found in the region's submarine canyons. And since it was summer break and the pay was decent, I agreed to do 3 evening lectures over the course of the trip. The first 6 days were exactly what I expected. Pleasant weather, engaged passengers who asked thoughtful questions during my talks, and plenty of opportunities to observe the waters I'd spent my career studying from a different perspective than my usual research vessel. I gave my first lecture on July 15th about bioluminescent organisms and their role in deep-sea ecosystems, my second on July 17th about the Cascadia subduction zone and its geological impact on marine habitats. And I was scheduled for my final talk on July 19th about conservation challenges in the Pacific Northwest. It was the evening of July 18th, around 8:45 p.m. When everything changed, I was in my cabin reviewing notes for the next day's lecture when there was a rapid knocking on my door, and I opened it to find one of the passengers, a retired engineer named Bennett, who'd been particularly attentive during my talks, looking flushed and excited. He said I needed to come to the observation deck immediately, that there were lights in the water unlike anything he'd ever seen, and that several other passengers were watching, but no one could explain what they were seeing. I grabbed my binoculars and followed him up to the deck. We were passing near Cape Flattery at the northwestern tip of the Olympic Peninsula, an area where the Strait of Juan de Fuca meets the Pacific Ocean. Waters I knew were deep and biologically active, but generally well documented. When I got to the railing, there were already about 20 passengers gathered, all pointing and murmuring. And when I looked out at the water, I felt my breath catch in my throat in a way that hadn't happened since I was a graduate student, seeing my first deep-sea dive footage. The water was lit up, but not in any pattern I recognized from 25 years of studying bioluminescence. These weren't the random sparkles of dinoflagellates or the steady glow of deep-sea fish. These were geometric patterns, perfect circles and straight lines of light moving in coordinated sequences about 200 meters from the ship. The colors were wrong too. Most bioluminescent organisms produce blue-green light because it travels best through water. But what I was seeing included brilliant turquoise, violet, and even what looked like pale gold, colors that shouldn't be possible with known bioluminescent chemistry. I raised my binoculars and focused on the patterns, watching them pulse and shift, and I realized they were moving in ways that suggested intentional communication or coordination rather than the reflexive responses of simple organisms. Why would something in the ocean create patterns that look designed rather than evolved? I immediately went to find the ship's captain, a Norwegian man named Christopher, who I'd chatted with a few times during meals. And I found him on the bridge, monitoring our course. I explained what we were seeing and strongly recommended that he slow the ship so I could attempt to document and possibly sample whatever was producing the light display. I explained that in my professional opinion, this was a significant scientific discovery that warranted investigation. Christopher looked uncomfortable, but agreed to reduce speed. And he made an announcement over the ship's PA system that we were slowing to observe an unusual natural phenomenon. which brought even more passengers up to the observation decks. By the time I got back outside with my camera equipment and sample collection kit, there must have been 70 or 80 people lining the railings, and the light display had intensified dramatically. The geometric patterns were now forming three-dimensional structures that appeared to rise up from the depths. Columns of light that reached maybe 10 or 15 meters toward the surface before dissolving and reforming in different configurations. I was taking photos and video, adjusting settings to capture the true colors and patterns, when I noticed that the ship's own instruments seemed to be malfunctioning. The deck lights were flickering, and I could hear crew members on radios reporting compass irregularities. The phenomenon continued for approximately 12 minutes, during which time I shot over 400 photographs and about 20 minutes of video footage. And I was preparing to deploy a plankton net to try to collect samples when the entire display suddenly stopped. Not gradually fading, but instantly shutting off like someone had flipped a switch. The water returned to its normal dark state, just the usual reflection of our ship's lights. And the crowd of passengers stood there in stunned silence before breaking into excited chatter about what they'd all witnessed. I went back to Christopher and requested permission to deploy sampling equipment in the area where the lights had been. I explained that even if the organisms weren't actively luminescing anymore, we might be able to collect specimens that could be analyzed later. His response surprised me. He said we needed to resume our scheduled course immediately, that we were already behind schedule and couldn't afford further delays. I pointed out that we'd only stopped for about 15 minutes and that this was potentially a major scientific discovery. But he became surprisingly firm, almost hostile, insisting that the crews had commitments and that I was welcome to report my observations through proper channels once we reached port. I was frustrated, but I'm not the captain. So I went back to my cabin to review the footage and photos I'd captured, already mentally drafting the paper I would write and thinking about which colleagues I needed to contact. But as I was organizing my files, I heard voices in the corridor outside my cabin, and I recognized Christopher's accent. I moved closer to my door, not quite opening it, but listening, and I clearly heard him say, "Another one," and then recite a set of coordinates, followed by, "Yes, same characteristics as the previous reports." My heart started racing, because the implication was obvious. Whatever we'd just seen wasn't unprecedented. There had been previous reports, previous incidents, and the captain was reporting it to someone, presumably Coast Guard or some other maritime authority. I waited until I heard footsteps moving away. Then I opened my door and looked out. But the corridor was empty. The rest of that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept reviewing my footage and photos, confirming that what I'd captured was real and documented, and trying to figure out why Christopher would have prior knowledge of similar phenomena, but hadn't mentioned it when I first alerted him. The next morning at breakfast, I tried to casually bring it up with some of the crew members I'd become friendly with over the week, asking if they'd ever seen anything like the previous night's light display on other cruises. Every single one of them became evasive, changing the subject or claiming they hadn't been on deck and didn't know what I was talking about, even though I'd seen at least 2 of them in the crowd watching. One crew member, a young woman from the Philippines who'd attended all my lectures and seemed genuinely interested in marine biology, pulled me aside later and quietly said I should stop asking questions, that it was above her pay grade, and that guests who pushed too hard sometimes weren't invited back. I gave my final lecture that evening as scheduled, and during the Q&A session, multiple passengers asked about the lights we'd seen, wanting my scientific opinion on what had caused them. I answered honestly, saying that I'd never seen anything like it in my career, that the patterns and colors didn't match any known bioluminescent organisms, and that I would be filing reports with NOAA and my university research department to document the observation. I noticed Christopher was standing in the back of the lecture hall, which he hadn't done for my previous talks, and his expression was decidedly unfriendly. When the cruise ended in Astoria on July 21st, I said my goodbyes to passengers and crew. Several people asked me to email them once I'd figured out what we'd seen, and I promised I would. I drove straight back to Seattle and spent the next 3 days writing a detailed report, including timestamps, coordinates, water conditions, and attaching my best photographs and video clips. I submitted it to NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research. I sent copies to my department chair and 3 colleagues who specialize in bioluminescence. And I posted a preliminary abstract to a marine biology research forum I'm part of. The response from NOAA came within 48 hours, which itself was unusual because normally these reports sit in queues for weeks. A researcher I'd never heard of named Nathan called me and asked extremely specific questions about the exact location, the ship's instrumentation, whether I'd noticed any electromagnetic anomalies, whether any equipment had been deployed in the water. His questions felt less like scientific curiosity and more like he was verifying information he already had. And at the end of the call, he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "Andy, I appreciate your diligence in reporting this observation, but I need to advise you that this area is subject to ongoing monitoring, and further public discussion could interfere with important research. I'm sure you understand." I didn't understand. I said that transparency is fundamental to scientific research, and that if there's ongoing work in the area, then collaboration would be more productive than secrecy. Nathan was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm not suggesting secrecy. I'm suggesting discretion. There are national security implications that I'm not at liberty to discuss, and I strongly recommend you remove your forum post and refrain from publishing about this observation." Then he thanked me for my time and hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. A government researcher had essentially told me to suppress scientific data, something that goes against every principle of academic research. I pulled up the Marine Biology Forum where I'd posted my abstract, and I found that my post had been removed, not by me, but by forum administrators, with a note that it violated community guidelines regarding unverified claims. I'd been a member of that forum for 8 years and had posted dozens of research summaries. Never once had anything been removed. I started reaching out to the passengers who'd asked me to keep them informed. I wanted to see if any of them still had their photos and videos from that night, thinking that multiple independent sources would be harder to dismiss. Out of the 15 passengers I was able to contact, 12 said their footage hadn't turned out. It was too dark or too blurry, or their camera settings had been wrong, which seemed statistically improbable given that I'd seen several people with professional-looking equipment. 2 others said they deleted their files to free up space on their phones, and 1 person stopped responding to my emails entirely after initially agreeing to send me their photos. My university colleagues were more supportive, but ultimately cautious. They acknowledged that my documentation was intriguing, but pointed out that without physical samples or reproducible observations, it would be difficult to publish in peer-reviewed journals. One colleague I've known for 15 years took me out for coffee and gently suggested that the stress of constant travel and research might be affecting my perception. That perhaps I'd misinterpreted natural phenomena because of the unusual viewing angle from a cruise ship. I showed him my photos and videos, the geometric patterns clearly visible, and he admitted they were strange, but said, "Strange doesn't mean unexplainable." It's been 3 months now since that cruise, and I still have all my documentation backed up on 3 separate hard drives. I've shown it to enough people that I know I'm not imagining things or misremembering what happened. But I've also learned that there's a difference between having evidence and being able to do anything with it. I can't publish without peer review Peer review won't happen without institutional support, and institutional support evaporates when government agencies make it clear they don't want something investigated. I've started collecting historical reports from other mariners and researchers. I've found scattered mentions in old Coast Guard logs and fishermen's accounts of similar light displays in the same general area going back decades, always dismissed as electrical storms or bioluminescent blooms or equipment malfunctions. What bothers me most isn't that I don't have answers. I've spent my entire career asking questions that take years or decades to answer. What bothers me is the active suppression, the way Christopher clearly knew to report it to specific authorities, the way Nathan's call felt like a warning rather than scientific consultation, the way passengers' videos mysteriously failed or disappeared. I'm a scientist. I'm trained to be skeptical and to demand evidence. But I'm also trained to recognize patterns. And the pattern here suggests that whatever I saw near Cape Flattery on July 18th is something that certain institutions are aware of and actively working to keep quiet. I haven't been invited back to lecture on any more educational cruises, which isn't surprising, and my department chair gently suggested I focus on my traditional deep-sea research, rather than pursuing unusual observations that might impact my professional reputation. So I've gone back to my regular work, analyzing sediment samples and writing grant proposals. But I keep those backup drives in a safe deposit box. And I keep looking for other researchers who might have seen similar things and been similarly silenced. Because whatever is creating geometric light patterns in precise colors that shouldn't exist in nature, whatever it is that makes ships' instruments malfunction and causes government researchers to issue warnings about national security, it's still out there in those dark waters, still performing its strange illuminated rituals, and someone knows exactly what it is. My name is Yamaleth. I'm 71 years old, and I spent 40 years as a librarian in Bellingham before retiring 3 years ago. Which means I've built my entire life around order, cataloging systems, and the certainty that stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. But what happened to me on a 4-day February cruise through the San Juan Islands aboard the Islander has shaken my fundamental understanding of how time works. And I'm still not entirely sure whether I experienced something paranormal or simply lost my grip on reality in the fog-shrouded waters of the Pacific Northwest. My husband Enzo died 2 years ago after 47 years of marriage. A quiet man who loved his woodworking shop and Sunday crossword puzzles. And I'd spent those 2 years in our too-large house in Bellingham, going through the motions of living while feeling like I was stuck in amber, frozen in the moment he took his last breath. My daughter Catlea, who lives in Portland with her family, had been gently pushing me to do something for myself, to take a trip or join a group or anything that might help me move forward. So when I saw an advertisement for a budget-friendly winter cruise through the Pacific Northwest's San Juan Islands, I booked it almost impulsively, my first solo vacation in decades. I arrived at the dock in Anacortes on February 12th, a gray Tuesday morning with temperatures hovering around 38 degrees, and the Islander was smaller than I'd expected, maybe capacity for 80 passengers. The kind of vessel that feels more like a large yacht than a proper cruise ship. As I walked up the gangway with my small rolling suitcase, I immediately felt out of place. Most of the other passengers seemed to be couples, younger people on romantic getaways or retirees traveling together. And there I was, a 71-year-old widow eating breakfast alone while surrounded by people holding hands across their tables. But I was determined to make the best of it. I'd paid for this trip and Enzo would have wanted me to try. So I smiled at the crew members, found my cabin, which was tiny but clean with a porthole window showing endless gray water, and unpacked my things with the methodical care I'd used to organize library books for 4 decades. The first full day February 13th was pleasant enough in the way that things can be pleasant when you're going through the motions without really feeling them. We docked at Friday Harbor in the morning, and I joined a small group tour of the Whale Museum, learning facts about orcas and gray whales that pass through these Pacific Northwest waters. Though I couldn't help but notice I was the only person not paired off with someone. I had lunch at a small cafe in town, clam chowder that was too salty and sourdough bread that was actually quite good, then wandered through a few shops selling the usual tourist items, refrigerator magnets shaped like orcas and sweatshirts declaring love for the San Juan Islands. I was back on the ship by 3:30 p.m. in a stellar time for afternoon tea service in the small lounge, where I sat in a corner armchair with a paperback mystery I'd brought from home. Though I found myself reading the same page multiple times without absorbing any of it. Dinner that evening was at 6:30 p.m., assigned seating at tables for 8. And I found myself with 3 couples who were polite but clearly more interested in talking among themselves than including the odd woman out in their conversations. The menu was printed on cream-colored cardstock. I still remember it clearly. Roasted chicken with herb butter, green beans almondine, wild rice pilaf, and for dessert, a chocolate torte with raspberry sauce. I went to bed around 9 p.m., took my blood pressure medication with a glass of water from the tiny bathroom sink, and fell asleep to the gentle rocking of the ship and the sound of water against the hull. When I woke up the next morning, February 14th, according to my phone, I got dressed and went to the dining room for breakfast. And that's when I noticed something that made me pause. The couple at the table nearest the window, a man and woman in their 40s, were having the exact same argument I'd heard them having the previous morning. Something about whether they should have booked a longer cruise. I assumed it was just a continuation of an ongoing disagreement. Couples do that, circle back to the same topics over and over. But then I heard the morning announcement over the ship's PA system, and my stomach did a strange flip because it was identical, word for word, to yesterday's announcement, welcoming us to Friday Harbor and encouraging us to join the morning Whale Museum tour. I checked my phone again. It definitely said February 14th. And I told myself I must have been confused yesterday. Maybe we'd arrived at Friday Harbor late in the evening on the 13th, and I'd misremembered when we'd actually visited the museum. I'm 71 years old, and sometimes dates get fuzzy. So I went on the tour again, figuring maybe I'd see different exhibits or learn new facts. But it was the exact same tour with the exact same guide. A young woman with red hair who made the exact same jokes at the exact same moments. And I found myself standing in front of the same orca skeleton I'd photographed yesterday. Except now I couldn't find yesterday's photo in my phone. Could you trust your own memories if the calendar insisted they never happened? I had lunch at a different restaurant this time, deliberately choosing one I hadn't visited before. Ordered a turkey sandwich instead of clam chowder. But when I walked past the cafe where I'd eaten yesterday, the hostess didn't recognize me, which seemed odd since there couldn't be that many tourists visiting Friday Harbor on a cold February Tuesday. Back on the ship for afternoon tea, I sat in the same corner armchair without meaning to. Picked up my paperback and realized with creeping unease that I was on the same page I'd been reading yesterday. Or what I remembered as yesterday. At dinner, same assigned table, same 3 couples. Same menu on cream-colored cardstock. Roasted chicken with herb butter. Green beans almondine, wild rice pilaf. Chocolate torte with raspberry sauce. One of the women at my table, wearing a blue cardigan, mentioned that it was Valentine's Day, and her husband had forgotten to bring her flowers. And I opened my mouth to say, "You told that story yesterday," but stopped myself because I suddenly wasn't sure. Maybe she'd told it today. Maybe I was the one who was confused. I excused myself early and went back to my cabin, pulled out the small journal I'd brought to document the trip, and looked at my entries. There was only one entry, dated February 13th, describing the first day, the whale museum, the clam chowder, the tea service, the dinner menu. But nothing about February 14th, even though I clearly remembered writing in it yesterday morning before breakfast. I stayed awake most of that night, sitting in the small chair by my porthole window, watching the lights of Friday Harbor through the fog, trying to figure out if I was experiencing early dementia or if something genuinely impossible was happening in these Pacific Northwest waters. When I finally fell asleep sometime after 3 a.m., I dreamed about Enzo, about the last morning we'd had together when he'd made me eggs and toast and we'd done the crossword puzzle, and he'd gotten stuck on a 6-letter word for temporal anomaly. And I'd laughed and said, "That's too philosophical for a Tuesday puzzle." I woke up on February 14th again. I know how that sounds. I've read enough science fiction in my library career to know what a time loop is supposed to be. But those are stories, fiction, not things that happen to 71-year-old widows on budget cruises through the Pacific Northwest. But there it was, my phone showing February 14th, the same couple having the same argument about cruise length, the same PA announcement about Friday Harbor and the Whale Museum tour. This time, I didn't even get off the ship. I stayed in my cabin, documenting everything in my journal in case I forgot again. Writing down every detail I could remember, the blue cardigan, the red-haired tour guide's jokes, the menu, the forgotten Valentine's flowers. At 2 p.m., exactly 2 p.m., according to my watch, I heard a child screaming on the deck above me. And I went up to see what had happened. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, had dropped his ice cream cone and was having a meltdown while his embarrassed parents tried to console him. At 4:30 p.m., another PA announcement, this one about a whale sighting off the starboard side. And I joined the rush of passengers to the railing even though I knew with absolute certainty that we'd see 3 orcas surface twice before disappearing into the gray waters. That evening, I didn't go to dinner. I couldn't face that roasted chicken again, couldn't sit at that table with those 3 couples who would have the same conversations, and that woman in the blue cardigan would mention Valentine's Day and forgotten flowers. Instead, I found the ship's first mate, a man in his 30s named Ian, and I asked him what day it was. He looked at me with concern and said, "February 14th, ma'am, Valentine's Day. Are you feeling all right?" I asked him how many days we'd been at Friday Harbor, and he said we'd just arrived this morning. We'd be leaving first thing tomorrow for Roche Harbor. I asked if he remembered seeing me yesterday, and he said yesterday we were in transit. We hadn't been at Friday Harbor yesterday. I showed him my journal entry from February 13th describing the Whale Museum and Friday Harbor, and he read it with a polite but increasingly uncomfortable expression. Then suggested I might want to speak with the ship's medical officer if I was experiencing confusion. I went back to my cabin feeling like I was losing my mind, questioning everything I thought I knew about my own memory and perception, wondering if grief had finally broken something fundamental in my brain. I took my blood pressure medication, the same pill bottle I'd taken from the same spot for what felt like 3 nights in a row, and climbed into bed, expecting to wake up on February 14th for a 4th time. But I woke up on February 15th. The PA announcement was different. Welcoming us to Roche Harbor, the breakfast conversations were different. The weather had changed from overcast to partially sunny. I checked my journal, and there was still only one entry, dated February 13th. My phone's photo gallery showed pictures from Friday Harbor, but only from one day, February 14th, as if February 13th had never existed or had somehow been overwritten. I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified, relieved that the loop had broken, but terrified because I had clear, detailed memories of living the same day 3 times, memories that apparently existed only in my head. The rest of the cruise passed normally. We visited Roche Harbor, returned to Anacortes, and I went through the motions of being a tourist while carrying this strange secret that I couldn't tell anyone without sounding delusional. On the final morning, as we were all waiting to disembark, I was standing near the gangway with my rolling suitcase when an elderly man, maybe 75 or 76, someone I'd seen on the ship but never spoken to, walked past me and then stopped. He turned around, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as recognition mixed with relief, and said very quietly, "Did it happen to you too?" I felt my breath catch, and I nodded without saying anything. And he pulled out his phone, opened a new contact, and I gave him my number with shaking hands. We stood there for a moment, two old people who'd experienced something impossible in the fog-shrouded waters of the Pacific Northwest. And then he nodded once and walked down the gangway. And I never saw him again, never called. I never called him. Because what would we even say to each other? What could we possibly discuss that would make sense of what happened? It's been 4 months now since that cruise, and I still don't know what to believe. I have my memories of living February 14th 3 times, and I have my journal and phone that insist it only happened once. And I have the knowledge that at least one other person experienced something similar enough to recognize it in me. Sometimes I wonder if the Pacific Northwest fog that shrouded those islands does something to time, makes it slip and loop and repeat. Or if grief does something to perception that science hasn't quite figured out yet. Katleya keeps asking when I'm going to take another trip, and I smile and say maybe next year. But the truth is, I don't think I can. Because what if it happens again? What if I get stuck in another loop and this time I can't get out? What if I wake up on the same day over and over until I forget which version of myself is real? My name is Kai, I'm 23 years old, and this was supposed to be a simple summer job to save money for college, working as a deckhand on cruise ships running the Pacific Northwest routes from Seattle up through British Columbia and into Alaska. But what I discovered during those 3 months aboard the Pacific Star has left me questioning whether I should have ever signed that contract. And the non-disclosure agreement they made me sign at the end of the season ensures I'll never be able to prove what I saw. I grew up in Tacoma, worked retail and restaurant jobs through community college. And when I saw the posting for seasonal deckhand positions, paying $18 an hour plus room and board, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to make decent money while seeing the Pacific Northwest's most beautiful waters. The job description was straightforward enough. Assist with mooring operations, maintain deck cleanliness, help passengers during boarding and disembarking, participate in safety drills, and perform routine maintenance tasks in the lower levels of the ship. I reported for training in early May, spent 2 weeks learning safety protocols and ship operations at the company's facility in Seattle, and then was assigned to the Pacific Star, a mid-sized cruise vessel that runs weekly trips from Seattle through the Inside Passage, stopping at various ports in British Columbia before reaching southeastern Alaska. The crew was about 80 people total, a mix of seasonal workers like me and experienced staff who'd been with the company for years. And I was assigned to sea deck maintenance under a senior deckhand named Christian, who'd been working cruise ships for almost a decade. The first month was exactly what I expected. Long days of scrubbing railings, polishing brass fixtures, helping tie up mooring lines at ports, the kind of physical labor that leaves you exhausted but satisfied. And I was getting along well with the other deckhands and starting to feel like I'd made a good choice. It was mid-June. We were 3 days into a week-long cruise somewhere between Vancouver Island and the Alaskan Panhandle when I got assigned to late-night maintenance duty for the first time. My shift supervisor, a guy named Axel who always seemed irritated about something, handed me a checklist around 10 p.m. and told me to do a cleaning and inspection round of the lower crew decks, specifically C deck and D deck, where most of the mechanical systems and storage areas are located, places passengers never see. I'd been down there during the day before, but at night, with minimal lighting and most of the crew either off-duty or working passenger areas, it felt different. Cramped corridors with exposed pipes and electrical conduits, the constant thrumming of engines and ventilation systems creating this low-frequency noise that seemed to vibrate in your chest. I was about 40 minutes into my checklist, checking pressure gauges and making notes about a leaking valve that needed attention, when I realized I'd gotten turned around in the maze of corridors. The lower decks aren't laid out logically if you don't work down there regularly. Corridors dead end unexpectedly. Stairways lead to different sections, and the deck plans posted on walls are often outdated. I was trying to find the storage room where we keep cleaning supplies, following what I thought was the right corridor, when I heard something that made me stop, a sound that didn't fit with the usual mechanical noises of the ship. It was rhythmic, almost musical, a pattern of taps or knocks that repeated every few seconds, coming from somewhere ahead of me in a section I hadn't explored yet. I followed the sound, more out of curiosity than anything else, and found myself in a corridor I definitely hadn't been in before. The lighting was different here. Not the standard fluorescent tubes, but these harsh LED panels that gave everything a clinical appearance. At the end of the corridor was a door marked with multiple warning signs. Authorized personnel only, medical quarantine area, and PPE required beyond this point. If something's marked quarantine on a ship, shouldn't the crew be told about it? The door itself was different from the standard crew area doors. Reinforced steel with what looked like a magnetic seal around the edges, and a keycard reader with a small camera mounted above it. The rhythmic knocking sound was coming from behind that door, consistent and deliberate. And I stood there trying to figure out what legitimate reason there would be for a sealed quarantine section that none of the deckhands had been briefed about. I checked my watch. It was 11:17 p.m. and I knew I should just finish my checklist and get back upstairs. But something about the situation felt wrong enough that I took a photo of the door and its warning signs with my phone. Over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about that quarantine section. And I started paying attention to patterns, asking subtle questions to other deckhands about the lower deck layouts. What I learned was unsettling. Nobody seemed to know anything about a quarantine area. And when I mentioned it to Christian during a lunch break, his expression changed in a way that made my stomach drop. He pulled me aside after we finished eating, walked me to a quiet spot on the crew deck, and said in a low voice that I needed to forget I'd seen that section, that it was above my pay grade, and that asking questions about it was not a good career move. I asked him what was in there, and he said he didn't know and didn't want to know, that senior crew had access, but regular deckhands like us were supposed to pretend it didn't exist. I pressed him, asked if it was a medical facility for serious passenger emergencies, and he just shook his head and said, "Kai, I've been doing this job for 9 years. I've worked on 5 different ships in the Pacific Northwest, and every single one has had a section like that, and every single deckhand who stuck their nose in it either quit or got fired. So just do your job and stay away from that corridor." But I couldn't let it go. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe just the sense that something genuinely wrong was happening on the ship I was living on. So I started volunteering for late-night maintenance shifts, and I started timing my rounds to take me past that corridor around 11 p.m. What I discovered was a pattern. Every single night between approximately 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., those rhythmic sounds would occur, sometimes knocking, sometimes what sounded like scraping. And occasionally, I'd hear voices, muffled but definitely human, though I could never make out words. On the night of June 23rd, we hit rough weather off the coast of Haida Gwaii. The ship was pitching enough that passengers were told to stay in their cabins, and crew were running around securing loose items and dealing with seasickness emergencies. I was on late shift again, and when I made my way down to the lower decks around midnight, I noticed immediately that something was different. The corridor leading to the quarantine section had its lights on full brightness instead of the usual dim setting, and I could hear activity. Multiple people moving around, equipment being wheeled. I approached carefully, staying in the shadows of an intersecting corridor, and what I saw made my heart start racing in a way that had nothing to do with the ship's movement. The reinforced door was partially open, held by what looked like a medical gurney that someone had wheeled out and hadn't properly secured, and through the gap, I could see inside the room. It was set up like a field hospital or emergency medical facility. Multiple beds with equipment I didn't recognize, IV stands, monitoring devices. But what stopped my breath was that on one of the beds, clearly visible through the door gap, was a person strapped down with restraints. And standing next to them was a crew member wearing something that looked like hazmat gear, the kind you see in movies about disease outbreaks. I must have made a sound, or maybe the person on the bed sensed me, because their head turned toward the door and our eyes met. And I watched as they mouthed two words very clearly. "Help me." I stood there frozen, my mind trying to process what I was seeing, trying to find an innocent explanation for why there would be a passenger or crew member strapped to a medical bed in a hidden section of the ship, wearing what looked like a hospital gown, with crew and protective equipment attending them. Then someone inside the room noticed the door was ajar, and I heard a sharp voice say something I couldn't make out, and I knew I needed to leave immediately. I turned and headed back toward the main crew areas, trying to walk normally, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. And I made it back to the C-deck maintenance room where I was supposed to be working, and sat there with shaking hands, trying to figure out what to do. The next morning, I requested a meeting with my shift supervisor, Axel. Told him I needed to report something unusual I'd seen during my late-night rounds. His face went from annoyed to angry faster than I would have thought possible. And he cut me off before I could finish explaining. Told me that I'd been observed on security cameras in unauthorized areas, that I was violating my employment contract by entering restricted sections, and that one more incident would result in immediate termination. I tried to explain that I'd just been following sounds during my assigned maintenance patrol, that I hadn't intentionally entered anywhere I wasn't supposed to, but he wasn't interested in hearing it. He reassigned me to day shifts immediately, put me on deck cleaning duty in passenger areas where I'd be visible and supervised at all times, and made it clear that any further questions about ship operations would be grounds for termination and legal action. I spent the next 6 weeks working day shifts, watching my back and trying to figure out if I should report what I'd seen to someone outside the ship. But who would I tell? And what would I even say that didn't sound like a paranoid conspiracy theory? I started researching during my off hours, using the ship's limited crew internet access to look up missing passenger reports from Pacific Northwest cruises, searching for any news stories about medical emergencies on cruise ships, trying to find patterns or incidents that might explain what I'd seen. What I found was mostly nothing. Cruise lines are very good at controlling information, and serious incidents that occur at sea rarely make news unless they're dramatic enough that they can't be hidden. I did find scattered reports of passengers who'd gotten sick on cruises and been quarantined for the safety of others, and a few forum posts from former crew members hinting at medical facilities on ships that weren't on any official deck plans, but nothing concrete. The season ended in late August, and when I went to collect my final paycheck and terminate my contract, I was handed a non-disclosure agreement by the ship's purser. It was 3 pages of legal language, but the key section was clear. I was agreeing not to discuss any proprietary operational procedures, medical protocols, or unauthorized observations made during employment. And violation would result in legal action and financial penalties up to $50,000. The purser stood there watching me read it, and when I looked up and asked what would happen if I didn't sign, he smiled without warmth and said my final paycheck and the reference letter I'd need for future employment were contingent on signing. I signed it because I needed that money for school and couldn't afford legal problems. But I kept copies of everything. The photo of that reinforced door, my work schedules showing I was assigned to late-night shifts in those areas, notes I'd made about the sounds and patterns. I've tried to find other crew members from that season online, reaching out through social media. But the ones who respond seem uncomfortable discussing their time on the Pacific Star. And the ones I really want to talk to, the senior crew who might know what was actually happening in that quarantine section, don't respond at all. It's been 4 months since I left that job. I'm back in school now using the money I earned. But I can't stop wondering about that person I saw strapped to a bed who mouthed, "Help me," at me through a partially open door. Were they a passenger who'd gotten seriously ill and was being quarantined for legitimate public health reasons? Or were they being held for something else? And why would the crew need to hide medical facilities from the rest of the staff? I've thought about breaking the NDA and going to journalists or maritime authorities with what I saw. But I don't have proof of anything illegal, just observations that could be explained away as misunderstandings. And the legal consequences would destroy my ability to pay for college. What I do know is that I'll never work on a cruise ship again. And whenever I see advertisements for those beautiful Pacific Northwest cruises, scenic tours through pristine waters and charming ports, I think about what's happening in the lower decks where passengers never go. And I wonder how many other deckhands have seen things they're not supposed to see and signed agreements promising never to talk about them. My name is August. I'm 58 years old, and I've worked as a real estate agent in Tacoma for the past 20 years, which means I'm pretty good at reading people, picking up on subtle behavioral cues, recognizing when something feels off about a situation. But nothing in my professional experience prepared me for what I witnessed on a 7-day luxury cruise through the Pacific Northwest's Inside Passage that my husband Weston and I took in May to celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary. We'd saved for 2 years to afford the Crown Pacific, one of those upscale cruise lines where the smallest staterooms have balconies and the staff outnumbers the passengers. The kind of vacation we'd always talked about, but never thought we could actually afford. The route was spectacular. Vancouver to Sitka with extended stops at Glacier Bay and Tracy Arm Fjord, areas of the Pacific Northwest known for their pristine wilderness and dramatic ice formations. And we boarded on May 14th, feeling like we'd finally made it. Finally reached that stage of life where luxury travel was possible. The first 2 days were everything we'd hoped for. Our stateroom had a private balcony with views of the coastline. The food was exceptional, multiple restaurants with actual cloth napkins and wine lists. And the other passengers seemed like our kind of people. Mostly couples in their 50s and 60s, well-dressed, polite, the type who actually listened when you told stories at dinner. We befriended another couple on the second evening, Adrian and Kimber, who introduced themselves as being from Portland. And they seemed charming in that effortless way that some people have. Interesting jobs, they were both architects. Funny stories about their 3 grown children, and a genuine warmth that made conversation easy. We made plans to sit together at dinner and meet for drinks in the observation lounge. the kind of instant vacation friendship that develops when you're all in a good mood and away from regular life. May 17th was our third full day aboard, and we were approaching Glacier Bay National Park, one of the main highlights of any Pacific Northwest cruise, an area where massive tidewater glaciers calve directly into the sea, creating these thunderous displays of ice crashing into water. The ship was scheduled to spend most of the day cruising slowly through the bay, so passengers could observe the glaciers from various deck positions. And the captain made an announcement around 6 a.m. that we were entering the park boundaries. Weston and I got up early, bundled up because even in May, the temperatures near the glaciers hover around 40 degrees, and went out to the forward observation deck with our coffee to watch the sunrise over the ice. That's when I first noticed something strange. There were already about 15 passengers on deck, which wasn't unusual given the spectacular views. But they were all standing completely still, not talking, not taking photos, just staring at the glaciers in the distance with this fixed, intense focus. I commented to Weston that they must be really into the scenery, and he laughed and said something about early birds being serious about their nature watching. But as we found spots at the railing, I kept glancing at those other passengers and feeling increasingly uncomfortable with their behavior. They didn't move for over an hour, I know, because I checked my watch multiple times. These people just stood there as the ship got closer to the glaciers. And when other passengers arrived on deck and started chatting and taking photos, the still group didn't react at all, didn't even seem to notice. Around 8:30 a.m., I recognized one of them. It was Kimber from the couple we'd befriended, and I walked over to say good morning. But when I got close enough to see her face properly, I stopped. Her eyes were open, but she had this blank expression, and she was whispering something. I couldn't hear the words, but her lips were moving in this rhythmic pattern. And when I said her name, she didn't respond, didn't even blink. I went back to Weston and told him something was wrong with Kimber, that we should find Adrian and let him know his wife seemed unwell. So we went looking for him and found him in the main dining room. He seemed perfectly normal, eating breakfast and reading a newspaper. And when we told him Kimber was on the forward deck acting strangely, he seemed unconcerned, said she'd probably just gotten up early and was enjoying the glacier views without him. But something about his response felt off, too casual, and I insisted we go check on her together. When would you start to worry if dozens of people around you suddenly stopped acting human? By the time we got back to the forward deck around 9:15 a.m., the number of motionless passengers had grown to at least 30, all standing in this loose formation facing the glaciers, all with that same blank expression, all whispering in what I now realized was synchronized timing. Adrian saw Kimber among them, and his face went pale, and he rushed over and grabbed her arm, shaking her and saying her name loudly. But she didn't react, just kept staring and whispering. Other passengers were starting to notice now, pointing and talking in concerned voices. And I saw crew members on the edges of the deck speaking into radios. Weston and I stood there watching this impossible scene. 36 people who'd been normal yesterday, now acting like they were in some kind of trance, and the glaciers were getting closer. We were maybe a mile away now, and I could see the blue-white ice clearly. Could hear the occasional crack and rumble as chunks broke off and fell into the bay. The affected passengers seemed to become more agitated as we got closer. Their whispering got louder, though still not loud enough to make out words. And they started swaying slightly, all moving in the same rhythm. Around 10 a.m., the ship's doctor arrived with several nurses, and they started trying to examine the affected passengers, checking pulses, shining lights in eyes. But none of the entranced people reacted to being touched or spoken to. I overheard the doctor tell a crew member that their vital signs were normal, pupils responsive, no obvious signs of drugs or medical emergency, which somehow made it more disturbing because there was no explanation, Security personnel were now positioned around the group, not restraining anyone, but clearly monitoring the situation. And an announcement came over the PA system asking all other passengers to please move to the aft decks to give medical staff room to work. We reluctantly moved to the back of the ship, along with maybe 100 other worried passengers. And I could see people on their phones trying to get cell service, which was spotty this far into the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Calling family members back home or trying to Google what could cause mass hysteria. Someone near us was saying this was like that incident in Tanzania where dozens of schoolgirls started laughing uncontrollably and couldn't stop. Or that town in New York where teenagers developed tics and seizures with no medical cause. Mass psychogenic illness, someone else said. It happens in high-stress situations. But this didn't feel like stress. These people looked calm, just absent, like their consciousness had gone somewhere else. Around 11:30 a.m., something shifted. The affected passengers who'd been standing still suddenly started moving, all at once, walking toward the railing in that same synchronized way. Security personnel moved to intercept them, forming a human barrier. And that's when it got truly frightening, because the entranced passengers didn't stop or acknowledge the security staff. They just kept walking forward, pushing against the human barrier, and crew members had to physically restrain them. I watched Adrian trying to hold Kimber back, and she was fighting him with surprising strength, still whispering, still staring at the glaciers. And I realized with horror that they were all trying to get off the ship, trying to reach the ice. The captain made an emergency decision to increase speed and move away from the glaciers, and I felt the ship's engines change pitch as we started retreating from Glacier Bay. It took maybe 10 minutes before we'd put significant distance between the ship and the ice. And that's when the affected passengers all simultaneously stopped struggling, stopped whispering, and collapsed. Not passed out exactly, but like puppets with cut strings, they just sort of crumpled where they were standing, and security and medical staff rushed to help them. Over the next hour, we watched from our restricted position on the aft deck as the medical team examined each affected passenger and helped them to the ship's medical center. And around 1 p.m., an announcement was made that all affected passengers were recovering and showed no signs of injury or illness. The captain said we would be continuing with our scheduled itinerary, but that a full investigation would be conducted. And he asked any passengers who'd witnessed the incident to please fill out written statements. That evening at dinner, which felt surreal given what had happened, we saw Adrian and Kimber in the dining room, and they seemed completely normal, laughing and talking with other passengers like nothing had happened. We approached them carefully, asked how they were feeling, and Kimber looked confused and said, "Feeling fine. Why?" She had no memory of the morning, none at all. Thought she'd slept in and missed the glacier viewing. And when we told her what had happened, she looked at us like we were playing an elaborate joke. Adrian confirmed that Kimber couldn't remember anything from roughly 6 a.m. to 1 p.m., just a blank gap in her day. And the medical staff had told them this was likely a response to altitude or cold, or some combination of environmental factors. But I'd talked to other passengers who'd been on deck during the incident, and every single person reported the same thing. The affected passengers had been whispering in perfect synchronization, had moved in coordination like a choreographed performance, had all tried to leave the ship at exactly the same moment. That's not altitude sickness or cold exposure. That's not any kind of medical condition I'd ever heard of. I spent that night searching online medical journals on my phone's terrible connection, looking for any documented cases of mass synchronized behavior. And while I found examples of mass hysteria and shared delusions, nothing matched what I'd witnessed. The cruise continued for 4 more days, and the incident was barely mentioned, like everyone had agreed to just not talk about it. The affected passengers seemed fine, no recurring symptoms, no memories of what happened. And by the time we reached Sitka on May 21st, It felt almost dreamlike, like maybe we'd all imagined it. When we disembarked, representatives from the cruise line gave us all vouchers for 25% off a future cruise and had us sign acknowledgement forms stating we'd received medical attention or refused medical attention as applicable. But there was no explanation, no real investigation results shared with passengers. We flew home to Tacoma on May 22nd, and I tried to put the incident behind me. Told myself it was just one of those strange things that happens. Unexplainable but ultimately harmless since everyone recovered. Then in August, 3 months after the cruise, I saw an obituary in the Seattle Times for a man named Lincoln, and his photo looked familiar. So I checked my cruise photos and confirmed he'd been one of the affected passengers I'd seen on that deck. The obituary said he died of a heart attack at age 63. Survived by his wife Marley, no other details. That made me start looking, searching online obituaries and funeral home websites for other names I'd managed to learn during the cruise. And in early September, I found another one. A woman named Soraya, who died in late July, the obituary said, after a brief illness, which is what families say when they don't want to explain. I tried to reach out to her family through Facebook, very carefully, just expressing condolences and mentioning we'd been on the same cruise. And her adult daughter responded, and we had a phone conversation that lasted almost 2 hours. She told me that after her mother returned from the cruise, she'd become obsessed with cold temperatures, kept the air conditioning at 55 degrees, took ice baths multiple times a day, and had written a bizarre letter that the daughter had found after Soraya's death. She read part of it to me over the phone, and I wrote down what I could, phrases like, "The ice calls us back. We saw what waits in the frozen places. They showed us where we came from and where we must return." Soraya's daughter thought her mother had had some kind of psychotic break, possibly early onset dementia, but the timing meant it started immediately after the cruise. I contacted the Crown Pacific's corporate office and tried to report this, tried to say that 2 of the affected passengers had died within months, and maybe there should be a medical follow-up study. But I was told that passenger medical information was confidential and that they had no record of any serious medical incidents on our cruise date. I filed a complaint with the CDC, which oversees cruise ship health issues. But they said, unless there were reports of infectious disease, they couldn't investigate individual behavioral incidents. It's been 6 months now since that cruise. And Weston and I haven't booked another one, even though we loved everything about the experience, except those few horrible hours near Glacier Bay. Sometimes, I think about those 30-some people standing on deck in the cold Pacific Northwest morning, whispering in unison, staring at the ancient ice. And I wonder what they saw that I couldn't see, what they heard that I couldn't hear. And I wonder if whatever called to them from those glaciers is still out there, still calling, waiting for the next ship full of passengers to get close enough to answer. My name is Caleb. I'm 41 years old, and I've worked as a sous chef on cruise ships for 15 years, everything from Caribbean party boats to Mediterranean luxury liners. But this past August, when I took a contract position aboard the Pacific Majesty doing 3-day round trips between Seattle and Vancouver through the Pacific Northwest's Puget Sound, I discovered something that made me walk away from my entire career at sea. I'd been working shore-based restaurants in Miami for 3 months between contracts. And when the agency called with a summer position on a smaller vessel, I jumped at it. The pay was decent, $4,200 a month plus room and board. And the short route meant I'd have regular port access instead of being stuck at sea for weeks. The Pacific Majesty runs continuous 3-day loops, departing Seattle Friday evening, arriving Vancouver Sunday morning, departing Vancouver Sunday evening, back to Seattle Tuesday morning. Then 1 day of provisioning and maintenance before the cycle repeats. The galley operation was smaller than what I was used to, maybe 400 passengers max compared to the 1,000-plus megaships I'd worked before. And the crew was tight-knit, about 20 of us in food service, including servers and dishwashers. The head chef was a French guy named Isaiah, probably mid-50s, with that classic temperamental chef personality, but skilled enough that you respected him even when he was yelling about plating standards. My first week went smoothly. I learned the galley layout, which was typical for a vessel this size. Main prep area amidships on deck 2. Walk-in freezers and dry storage behind that. And smaller pantry stations on deck 3 for room service and specialty dining. It was my second Friday night. We'd just departed Seattle around 8 p.m., and passengers were at dinner service, when I noticed something odd while doing inventory in the main walk-in freezer. I was checking stock levels for the weekend, making notes about what we'd need to reorder when we docked Tuesday. And I accidentally knocked over a stack of empty crates in the back corner near the compressor housing. When I bent down to restack them, I noticed the wall panel behind them was loose, not damaged, but deliberately unsecured. And when I pulled it aside, I found a false compartment, maybe 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep. Inside were 8 sealed crates, industrial gray plastic with heavy-duty latches, stacked 2 high and labeled Specialty Seafood, King Crab, Keep Frozen. But the labeling bothered me immediately because king crab doesn't need to be stored at the deep freeze temperatures we maintain in that section, which is set for long-term frozen proteins at around -10 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas fresh or processed crab is typically stored at standard freezer temps around 0 to -5. I lifted one of the crates to check the weight, expecting the light feel of packaged crab, but it was heavy, maybe 40 or 50 pounds. Too heavy for crab and too uniformly weighted, like it was filled with something dense and solid, rather than irregularly shaped seafood. I put the panel back and restacked the empty crates exactly how they'd been, my mind racing through possibilities. And I decided to keep my mouth shut and observe before jumping to conclusions. Over the next few days, I paid attention to Isaiah's schedule and noticed he always did the Seattle provisioning check-in himself. Wouldn't let any other kitchen staff handle the receiving dock duties on Tuesday mornings when suppliers delivered. On Tuesday, August 15th, I volunteered to help with the morning deliveries. Said I wanted to learn the ordering procedures since I was new to this route. And Isaiah got noticeably tense, said he had a system and didn't need assistance. But I watched from the galley window that overlooked the service entrance, and around 11:30 p.m., well after our regular food suppliers had finished their deliveries, an unmarked white van pulled up, and 2 men in plain clothes unloaded 4 crates, identical to the ones I'd seen in the hidden compartment. Isaiah met them personally, signed something that looked like a clipboard manifest, and helped them load the crates onto a service cart, which he wheeled into the galley himself. I ducked into the dry storage pantry and watched through the crack in the door as he took the cart straight to the walk-in freezer. And 15 minutes later, he emerged with the empty cart, locked the freezer with his personal key, which he never normally used, and went up to his office. What kind of specialty seafood arrives at midnight without company logos or refrigerated transport? That Friday, as we departed Seattle again, I made an excuse about inventory audit and went into the walk-in during the dinner rush when everyone was too busy to notice. The hidden compartment now had 12 crates, the 8 I'd seen before plus 4 new ones, all with the same labeling, all impossibly heavy. I used my phone to take photos of the serial numbers stamped on the crates, fuzzy gray markings that looked like they'd been intentionally obscured. And then I noticed something else. Condensation patterns on the outside of the crates showed they'd been at room temperature recently, because they had heavy frost buildup from being rapidly frozen, which wouldn't happen to items that had been kept continuously cold during transport. Saturday night, we docked in Vancouver around 9 p.m., and I stayed up late claiming I needed to prep for Sunday brunch service. which gave me an excuse to be in the galley at 2:30 a.m. when I heard activity below deck. I crept down to the service level and saw Isaiah plus 2 crew members I recognized from engineering, not food service, wheeling the crates on service carts toward the gangway. I found a vantage point behind some equipment crates and watched as they met 3 people on the dock. Dressed in business casual, one of them carrying a tablet computer like they were, documenting receipt. The transfer took maybe 20 minutes. All 12 crates moved from ship to a black SUV with tinted windows and British Columbia plates. And the whole operation was efficient, professional, clearly something they'd done multiple times before. When Isaiah came back aboard, he looked satisfied, checked his watch, made a phone call on his cell that was brief, and then he saw me. I'd been too focused on watching the transfer and hadn't noticed him turn around after securing the gangway, and we made direct eye contact for maybe 3 seconds before I tried to act casual. Said I was just getting fresh air before starting the brunch prep. He walked over slowly, and I could tell he was calculating, trying to figure out how much I'd seen. And then he smiled and said, "Caleb, you're a good worker, very observant, maybe too observant for your own good." He asked me to come to his office after service that afternoon, said he wanted to discuss my contract and possible advancement opportunities. Every instinct I'd developed in 15 years of reading workplace politics told me this was not a friendly chat about career development. Sunday service went normally. Passengers disembarked in Vancouver, new passengers boarded, and we departed at 6 p.m. for the return to Seattle. At 7:30 p.m. I went to Isaiah's office as requested, and he was there with one of the engineering crew members who'd helped with the Saturday night transfer, a guy named Joshua who was built like he'd done physical labor his whole life. Isaiah got straight to the point, said he knew I'd seen the Vancouver transfer and that he respected my professionalism in not causing problems. He said the operation I'd witnessed was a private business arrangement that had nothing to do with the ship's primary operations. That certain high-value items needed to move between Pacific Northwest ports discreetly for customs and tax reasons, and that several crew members were compensated well for their assistance. Then he offered me $5,000 cash to help with the next transfer cycle and to keep my mouth shut about what I'd seen. Said I'd proven I could be trusted just by not immediately reporting it. I told him I needed to think about it, which was a lie. I already knew I wasn't going to help smuggle whatever was in those crates. But I wanted to buy time to figure out my next move. He gave me until Tuesday morning to decide. Said the offer was generous and I should seriously consider it, because turning it down would be choosing a difficult path. Joshua didn't say anything the entire conversation, just stood there radiating menace. That night, I went back to my cabin around 11 p.m. and found it had been ransacked. Not dramatically, but methodically searched. My belongings moved and replaced almost in the right positions, but not quite. Drawers opened and closed. My laptop moved slightly. On my bunk was a handwritten note on plain paper. Accidents happen on ships, especially two. People who don't understand their role, think carefully about your decision. I spent the rest of that night sitting in the crew lounge where there were cameras and other people, too scared to sleep in my cabin. Tuesday morning, we docked in Seattle, and I requested an emergency meeting with the captain. Told him I needed to report a serious situation involving cargo operations. He saw me in his office at 10 a.m., and I explained everything. The hidden compartment, the late-night deliveries, the Vancouver transfers, the offer of money, the threatening note. I showed him the photos I'd taken of the crates and serial numbers. The captain listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said that he was aware Isaiah operated some private consulting arrangements related to specialty food sourcing, that it had been cleared with shore management, and that I was mistaken if I thought anything illegal was occurring. He said the threatening note was probably just a prank between crew members, that the late-night deliveries were timed for convenience of suppliers working Pacific Northwest distribution schedules, and that if I was uncomfortable with the working environment, I was free to terminate my contract early. That's when I realized the operation wasn't just Isaiah and a few crew members. It involved management, possibly went all the way up to the ship's corporate owners, and that reporting it internally was not only useless, but potentially dangerous. I told the captain I wanted to exercise my right to terminate for personal reasons, and he said he'd process the paperwork, but that I wouldn't receive the usual employment references or completion bonuses. I packed my cabin that afternoon and was off the ship by 6:00 p.m. From a hotel in Seattle, I filed an anonymous tip with the Coast Guard and with Customs and Border Protection, provided all the details I could remember: the ship name, the crate descriptions, the timing of the Vancouver transfers. But I never heard anything back, and I don't know if they ever investigated. I checked news reports for months afterward, searching for any stories about smuggling operations or arrests related to Pacific Northwest cruise ships, but found nothing. I couldn't get another cruise ship position after that. The industry is small and word travels fast. And when agencies ran my references, the Pacific Majesty must have flagged me somehow, because suddenly every contract fell through at the last minute. I'd lost my entire career, 15 years of experience and connections, because I'd tried to do the right thing after stumbling onto something I wasn't supposed to see. I'm working as a line cook now at a restaurant in Tacoma, making half what I earned on ships, no benefits, no travel. And I lie awake some nights wondering what was actually in those crates, whether it was drugs or weapons or something else entirely. I wonder if the Coast Guard ever investigated, or if my anonymous tip went straight into a file that nobody ever looked at. And I wonder how many other crew members on cruise ships throughout the Pacific Northwest are involved in similar operations, moving mysterious cargo between ports while passengers enjoy their vacation buffets. My name is Ethan. I'm 45 years old, and I've worked as a meteorologist for the past 22 years. First with the National Weather Service, and now as an independent consultant specializing in Pacific Northwest weather patterns, which means I've studied every major storm system that's rolled through this region since I started my career. But what I experienced on a late November cruise aboard the Pacific Horizon has challenged every scientific principle I've ever relied on. I'm also an amateur storm chaser, the kind of person who gets excited rather than nervous when forecasts predict severe weather. And when I saw that a cruise line was offering a late-season sailing from the Olympic Peninsula to Vancouver Island specifically scheduled during the peak of Pacific Northwest storm season, I booked it immediately. The departure date was November 22nd, a time when North Pacific storm systems are at their most intense, when low-pressure zones sweep in from the ocean, bringing sustained winds of 40 to 60 knots and seas running 15 to 25 feet, conditions that most cruise lines actively avoid, but that I found absolutely fascinating from a meteorological standpoint. I brought professional-grade equipment with me, a portable weather station with anemometer and barometer, GPS-enabled cameras for documenting storm structure, and data logging software that could track atmospheric pressure changes minute by minute. The Pacific Horizon was a mid-sized vessel, maybe 300 passengers, and I'd specifically requested a cabin on the upper deck with access to the covered observation area where I could set up my equipment without getting soaked. The cruise itinerary was straightforward. 3 days moving north along the Washington coast past Cape Flattery, then across the Strait of Juan de Fuca to Vancouver Island, returning south through the Inside Passage. Classic Pacific Northwest maritime routing that would expose us to the full force of whatever storm systems were active. The first day was overcast, but relatively calm. seas running maybe 6 to 8 feet with winds around 20 knots. And I spent most of my time on the observation deck, calibrating my equipment and taking baseline readings. Other passengers thought I was strange, standing out there in 45-degree weather with rain gear and clipboards. But I was in my element, watching the cloud formations and checking the pressure readings against the official forecasts I'd downloaded before departure. By evening, we were off the coast near Glacier Bay, and the forecast I'd been monitoring showed a significant low-pressure system developing about 200 miles west of our position, expected to move eastward and intensify over the next 24 hours. November 23rd dawned gray and rough. The ship was pitching noticeably by 6:00 a.m., and I was back on deck with my equipment by 6:30, excited to document what the models were predicting would be a classic Pacific Northwest storm. By 10 a.m., the barometric pressure had dropped to 29.14 inches of mercury, and falling. Winds had increased to sustained 35 knots with gusts to 45. And seas were building to 12 to 15 feet, textbook conditions for a developing extratropical cyclone. I was taking detailed notes, photographing the cloud structure which showed the classic comma-shaped pattern you see in satellite imagery of mature storm systems, and monitoring ship traffic on my handheld marine radio, which was reporting similar conditions throughout the region. But around 11:30 a.m., something changed that made me stop and check my instruments, because what I was seeing didn't match any weather pattern I'd studied in 22 years of professional meteorology. The wind direction shifted 180 degrees in less than 5 minutes, going from southwest to northeast, which can happen in frontal passages, but the pressure wasn't rising like it should. It was still falling, now down to 28.92 inches. Then I noticed the cloud structure was wrong. The comma pattern had tightened into something that looked almost circular. And at the center, maybe 15 miles from our position based on my visual estimate, there appeared to be a clear area, an eye-like formation. How do you explain a storm that follows rules that don't exist in atmospheric science? But here's the thing that made my training scream that something was impossible: tropical cyclones, which are the only storm systems that develop true eyes, don't form in the Pacific Northwest in November. The water temperature is too cold, around 48 to 52 degrees Fahrenheit. You need at least 80 degrees for tropical development. And this eye was too small, maybe 3 to 4 miles across based on what I could see, whereas hurricane eyes are typically 20 to 40 miles in diameter. And it was too perfectly circular, too geometrically precise. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the formation, and I could clearly see the wall of clouds rotating around this central clear area. But the rotation was wrong. Counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere is normal, but this was rotating clockwise, which violates the Coriolis effect. I immediately tried to contact the bridge. The ship has a direct emergency line from passenger areas, and I got through to someone who identified himself as the duty officer. I explained that I was a professional meteorologist and that we were approaching an atmospheric phenomenon that didn't match any known weather pattern, that the ship should alter course to avoid it. He thanked me for my concern, said the bridge was monitoring conditions closely, and disconnected. I stood there staring at my instruments showing impossible readings. Pressure now at 28.76 and still dropping. Wind speed fluctuating wildly between 20 and 55 knots with no discernible pattern. And watched as the ship continued on what appeared to be a direct course toward the anomaly. Over the next hour, I tried 3 more times to reach the bridge, and each time I was told the situation was under control. But I could see we weren't altering course. We were heading straight for that impossible eye formation. Other passengers had retreated inside. The seas were now running 18 to 20 feet, and the ship was rolling heavily. But I stayed on the covered observation deck, secured by a safety harness I'd brought specifically for rough weather documentation, and kept my equipment running. Around 1:15 p.m., I decided to physically go to the bridge, take my data logs, and force someone to look at what I was seeing. So I left my equipment secured and made my way up to the bridge level. But when I got to the bridge door, there was a crew member stationed there. A young guy, maybe 25 years old, who told me passengers weren't allowed on the bridge during heavy weather. I showed him my credentials, explained I was a meteorologist and had critical information about the storm system. And he radioed someone, then told me the captain was aware of the conditions and I should return to a passenger area for my safety. I argued, said this was unprecedented and potentially dangerous, and he became more firm. Said if I didn't comply, he'd have to call security. I had no choice but to return to the observation deck. And as I stood there, I realized with growing unease that the crew's response suggested they expected this, that whatever we were heading into wasn't a surprise to them. By 2:00 p.m., we were maybe 5 miles from the I formation, close enough that I could see the structure with frightening clarity. Walls of clouds rising to what I estimated was 40,000 feet, rotating in that impossible clockwise direction. And at the center, clear sky, I could literally see blue through the center of this thing. My instruments were going haywire. The barometer hit 28.58 inches and then started fluctuating up and down by full points in seconds. The anemometer was showing wind readings that made no physical sense, alternating between dead calm and 70 knots every few seconds. The GPS on my camera was showing our position as shifting erratically, jumping around by hundreds of feet, even though the ship's motion was relatively steady given the conditions. At 2:17 p.m. by my watch, we entered the formation. I felt it physically, a sensation like passing through a membrane. And suddenly the wind stopped, completely stopped. The rain stopped, and I looked up to see clear sky directly overhead, pale blue with thin high clouds at the edges. But all around us, maybe a mile in every direction, was a wall of storm. Churning black clouds shot through with lightning, and we were sitting in the center in perfect calm. Then every piece of electronic equipment I had stopped working. My weather station died, my cameras shut off, my GPS showed error messages. Even my watch, which is radio-controlled, froze at 2:17. I pulled out my backup handheld compass, the old-fashioned magnetic kind that doesn't need batteries, and watched in disbelief as the needle spun wildly, rotating continuously clockwise without ever finding north. The ship's engines changed pitch. I could feel it through the deck. And we seemed to slow down, just drifting in this impossible eye of calm surrounded by chaos. I looked around for other passengers, but the observation deck was empty. I was alone out there. And when I tried the door to go inside, I found it had locked automatically. Some kind of safety feature I hadn't known about. For 17 minutes, by the frozen display on my watch, we sat in that formation. I have no other way to measure the time, because when everything restarted, that's what my watch showed. 17 minutes of missing time. During that time, I experienced sensations I can't adequately explain. A feeling of pressure in my ears like rapid altitude change, a taste like ozone in the air, and most disturbing, a complete absence of sound from outside the ship. No waves against the hull, no wind, nothing. Just the ship's internal systems and my own breathing. I tried to take photos with my phone, but it was dead too. Black screen, wouldn't respond to any buttons. Then at what my watch later showed as 2:34 p.m., everything restarted simultaneously. A rush of sound and sensation. Wind and rain hitting the ship. My equipment powering back on with startup sequences. And we were moving, engines at full, heading away from the formation which I could see behind us, already dissolving. The clouds breaking up and dispersing in ways that storms don't naturally dissipate. I checked my GPS position and felt my heart sink. We were approximately 40 nautical miles northeast of where we should have been, 40 miles off course. And at the speed the ship had been traveling even before we entered that formation, there was no way we could have covered that distance in 17 minutes. I immediately started checking my data logs, but every device showed a 17-minute gap from 2:17 p.m. to 2:34 p.m. No readings, no recordings, just blank space in the data files, as if those minutes had never existed. My cameras showed the same thing. Timestamps jumping from 2:17 to 2:34 with no frames in between. I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to make sense of what had happened, rechecking calculations, reviewing basic atmospheric physics principles. But nothing explained what I'd witnessed or the impossible displacement of the ship. That evening, the captain made an announcement over the PA system. He said we'd encountered an unexpected weather pattern that had required navigational adjustments, and that we would be arriving in Vancouver approximately 6 hours behind schedule. That was it. No explanation of what the weather pattern was. No acknowledgement that we'd somehow traveled 40 miles in 17 minutes. Just a bland statement about unexpected weather. I tried to talk to other passengers about what they'd experienced, but most of them had been inside, had felt the ship slow down and noticed their electronics malfunction, but hadn't seen the formation or understood what was happening. When we docked in Vancouver on November 24th, I went straight to the Maritime Authority office and filed a detailed report, provided copies of all my data logs showing the impossible readings and the 17-minute gap. The official I spoke with listened politely, took my information, and said they'd look into it. But his body language told me he thought I was either confused or exaggerating. I followed up 3 times over the next month and never received any substantive response. I've spent the last year trying to find answers, reaching out to other meteorologists, searching for similar reports in maritime records, looking for any scientific literature about spontaneous eye formation in extratropical systems. I found nothing, but I did find passing references in old Coast Guard logs to unexplained navigation anomalies in the Pacific Northwest during storm conditions. Incidents where ships reported position changes that didn't match their speed and heading. None of them provided explanations, just notes that crews had experienced equipment malfunctions during severe weather. What bothers me most isn't that I can't explain what happened. Science is full of mysteries waiting to be solved. What bothers me is that the crew of the Pacific Horizon seemed to expect it, seemed to know that formation would be there and deliberately steered us into it, and then covered up what happened with bland official statements about weather patterns. I wonder how many times they've done it, how many cruises have deliberately entered that formation, and what actually happens during those 17 minutes that all our instruments can't record. Thanks for surviving another story with Mr. Nightveil. If these Pacific Northwest nightmares kept you awake, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more chilling encounters. Drop your own cruise horror stories in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay safe, and remember, some waters hide secrets that were never meant to surface. My name is Ensley. I'm 26 years old, and I work as a software engineer in Seattle, which means I spend most of my days staring at screens, debugging code, and dealing with the kind of burnout that makes you forget what it feels like to be a person instead of a productivity machine. So when my therapist suggested I take a break and specifically recommended a wellness cruise, something with meditation and nature, instead of my usual coping mechanisms of more work and no sleep, I booked a 5-day solo trip on the Pacific Serenity through the Salish Sea in April. The cruise was marketed as a mindfulness retreat on water, small ship with maybe 80 passengers max, visiting quiet anchorages in the Juan Islands, daily meditation sessions led by actual trained instructors, yoga on deck at sunrise, plant-based meals, the whole wellness package that normally would make me roll my eyes, but that I desperately needed. I boarded on April 12th, feeling skeptical but hopeful. My first real vacation in 3 years, carrying a duffel bag with comfortable clothes and a commitment to disconnect from work email and actually try to relax. The first 2 days were genuinely wonderful. In a way that surprised me, the Pacific Northwest waters in April are cold and gray, but beautiful. All mist and evergreen islands, and the kind of stillness that makes you realize how much noise you normally carry in your head. I attended the meditation sessions in the ship's quiet room, a space with floor cushions and windows facing the water. And for the first time in months, I could actually sit still for 20 minutes without my mind immediately jumping to work problems. I slept better than I had in years. Deep, dreamless sleep in my small cabin with the gentle rocking of the ship. Waking up actually rested instead of immediately checking my phone. On the morning of April 15th, the third day of the cruise, I woke up in the ship's library. And for a few seconds, I couldn't process it. Couldn't understand why I was lying on a leather couch surrounded by bookshelves instead of in my cabin. My first thought was confusion, then embarrassment, wondering if I'd fallen asleep reading and somehow not noticed. But then I realized I was still in my pajamas, thin cotton pants and a tank top, and my feet were cold, really cold. And when I looked down, I saw they were muddy. Not just dirty, but covered in actual mud up to my ankles. And the leather couch had muddy footprints on it where I'd apparently climbed up. I sat up quickly, heart pounding, and tried to piece together how I'd gotten there. My last clear memory was going to bed around 10 p.m. after the evening meditation session, reading for maybe 20 minutes, and then nothing. Just a blank gap until waking up in the library, which according to the wall clock showed 6:47 a.m. I'd apparently sleepwalked, something I hadn't done since I was maybe 8 years old. Not just walked down a hallway, but navigated through the ship, gone, outside, walked on muddy ground, and then come back inside to the library. I cleaned my feet in the library's small bathroom sink, heart still racing, and snuck back to my cabin before anyone could see me. I spent most of that day trying to rationalize it. Stress-induced sleepwalking wasn't that unusual. I'd been working 60-hour weeks for months before the cruise. My body was probably just processing all that accumulated exhaustion. I mentioned it casually to one of the wellness instructors during the afternoon meditation session, said I'd had some trouble sleeping, and she nodded sympathetically and suggested some breathing exercises for sleep anxiety. That night, I went to bed feeling reassured, did the breathing exercises, and fell asleep around 10:30 p.m. I woke up on the observation deck at 4:22 a.m. according to my phone, standing at the railing in clothes I didn't remember putting on, a hoodie and jeans instead of my pajamas. And I had no memory of changing, no memory of leaving my cabin, no memory of walking up 3 levels to the deck. My hands were gripping the railing so tightly they'd gone numb. And when I looked down, I saw I was wearing different shoes than I'd packed, canvas slip-ons that I'd never seen before, and my feet were cold and wet again. A crew member was standing about 20 feet away, an older woman in a Pacific Serenity uniform. And when she saw me turn around, she walked over with concern on her face. She asked if I was all right, if I needed help getting back to my cabin, and I tried to explain that I'd been sleepwalking, that I didn't know how I'd gotten there. Her expression shifted, became more guarded, and she said something that made my blood run cold. She said, "I saw you out here earlier. Around 3 a.m., you were standing right there watching something in the water. I called out to you, but you didn't respond. I insisted I had no memory of that, that I'd just woken up." And she studied my face like she was trying to decide if I was lying, then offered to walk me back to my cabin. Can you trust yourself when your body does things your mind can't remember? I became terrified of sleeping after that. Spent the rest of April 16th exhausted but wired, attending the sessions but barely able to focus, jumping at every sound, checking and rechecking that my cabin door was locked, even though clearly locks didn't stop me when I was sleepwalking. During the evening meditation session, I met another passenger, a woman maybe in her 30s named Ashlyn, who'd been on several wellness cruises, and I ended up telling her everything. The library, the observation deck, the lost time, the mud. And instead of looking at me like I was crazy, she looked concerned and said I shouldn't sleep alone. She offered to stay in my cabin that night, said she'd keep watch, make sure I didn't leave, and I was desperate enough to agree, even though we just met. We pushed the two narrow beds together so she could grab me if I tried to get up, and I lay there rigid with fear, trying to stay awake. But eventually exhaustion won, and I fell asleep around midnight. What happened next, I only know because Ashlyn recorded it on her phone. Because when I woke up the next morning in my bed, with her shaking me gently and showing me the video, I had no memory of any of it. The video timestamp starts at 2:47 a.m. The cabin is dark except for the dim light from Ashlyn's phone screen, and it shows me sitting up in bed, eyes open but vacant. Blank, wrong. I get out of bed in one smooth motion, no hesitation, no stumbling, and start putting on clothes. The same hoodie and jeans from the previous night, which I'd left folded on the chair. Ashlyn's voice on the recording whispered, "Ensley, can you hear me?" And I don't respond, don't even glance in her direction, just finish dressing and walk to the cabin door. She follows me with the camera, and the video shows me unlocking the door and walking into the corridor, moving with purpose. Not the confused wandering you'd expect from someone sleepwalking. The recording continues through dark corridors. I'm walking ahead, and Ashlyn is following at a distance, and we go upstairs to the main deck, then out through a door to the exterior observation area. The video shows me go straight to the railing, the same spot the crew member had mentioned, and I stand there completely still for what the video timestamp shows is 47 minutes. During that time, Ashlyn gets closer with the camera, and you can hear her breathing, hear the wind and the water, and you can see me in profile, my face visible in the deck lights, eyes open and staring at the water. Then around 3:34 a.m., according to the timestamp, I start making hand gestures, my hands lifting and moving in patterns that look deliberate, structured, almost like sign language, but nothing Ashlyn recognized. The movements are precise, repeated. And then I start speaking. Not words in English, not words in Hindi, which my parents speak, but sounds, guttural and rhythmic. And Ashlyn's voice on the recording, scared now. "Ensley, what are you saying?" I don't respond to her. Just keep making the gestures and speaking in that impossible language for another 8 minutes before suddenly going completely still again. At 3:42 a.m., the video shows me turn around and walk back inside. Same purposeful gait, and Ashlyn follows. And I go straight back to the cabin, take off the hoodie and jeans, put on my pajamas, and get into bed. All without ever showing any sign of consciousness. The video ends at 3:51 a.m. with me lying in bed asleep, and Ashlyn whispering, "Oh my God," over and over. When she showed me the video that morning, I watched it 3 times, feeling progressively more sick, because that was my body, my face, my hands making those gestures, and my voice speaking that language. But I had absolutely no memory, no sense of having done any of it. Ashlyn was shaken, kept asking what I thought I'd been doing, what I'd been looking at in the water, and I had no answers, just the terrible certainty that something was deeply wrong. We were scheduled to dock at Friday Harbor that afternoon, and I told Ashlyn I was getting off the cruise early. that I needed to see a doctor, needed to figure out what was happening to me. At breakfast, I tried one more time to eat, but I couldn't. Just sat there pushing food around my plate and watching other passengers talk and laugh like everything was normal. I noticed the crew member from 2 nights ago, the one who'd seen me on deck at 3 a.m., and she was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, something between pity and fear. I packed my things before we docked, told the ship's purser I had a family emergency and needed to leave early, and he processed my early departure without much concern. Ashlyn walked me to the gangway when we docked, gave me her contact information, made me promise to tell her what the doctor said. And I promised, even though I had no intention of following up, because I wanted to forget this had ever happened. I took a ferry back to Seattle that same afternoon, April 17th, and spent the next week seeing doctors, a regular physician who found nothing wrong physically, a sleep specialist who did a sleep study and found no abnormalities, a neurologist who ran scans and blood tests and found nothing. Everyone told me it was stress-induced, that the sleepwalking was my body's response to burnout, that it would probably stop now that I was back to my normal routine. But it didn't stop. Or rather, it changed into something even more disturbing. I couldn't sleep normally anymore when I was near water. Any water. I tried sleeping at my apartment in Seattle, which is near Puget Sound. And every time I started to drift off, I'd feel this intense urge to wake up, to get up and go to the water, a compulsion so strong it was physically painful to resist. I'd lie there fighting it for hours, eventually giving in and going to my balcony, standing there looking at the distant water. And sometimes I'd come back to awareness, not knowing how long I'd been standing there. I tried sleeping at a friend's house in Bellevue, further from the water, and it was better but still there. That pull, that voice that wasn't words, but felt like calling. Like something in the water was trying to reach me. My doctor prescribed sleeping pills, and they helped me lose consciousness, but I'd still wake up near windows, near doors, once in my car in the driveway with the keys in my hand. And I have no memory of getting there. In July, 4 months after the cruise, I quit my job in Seattle and moved to Denver, as far from the Pacific Northwest and its waters as I could afford. I told everyone it was for better opportunities, didn't mention the real reason, that I was terrified of what I might do if I stayed near the ocean. In Denver, I can sleep. Not well, but normally. No sleepwalking, no compulsions, no lost time, but I can't go near water. Even Lake Como or Sloan's Lake make me anxious, give me that feeling in the back of my mind, that pull. And I know if I stood at the edge, I'd feel that urge again. I still have Ashlyn's video on my phone. I've watched it maybe 100 times, trying to see something in my face or my movements that would explain what was happening, trying to understand the gestures I was making and the language I was speaking. I've shown it to linguists online who said it doesn't match any known language. I've shown it to people who study sleep disorders who said it's unusual but not unprecedented. And I've shown it to one person who studies folklore and maritime mythology who went quiet and asked me not to contact them again. I don't know what happened to me on that cruise. I don't know what I was looking at in the water or what was looking back. I don't know why my body knew things my mind didn't. Why I could speak in a language I've never learned and make gestures that seem to mean something, even though I have no idea what. What I do know is that I'm different now, that something changed in me during those sleepwalking episodes, and that whatever called to me from the waters of the Pacific Northwest is still calling. I can feel it even here in Colorado, 1,000 miles from any ocean, a constant presence in the back of my mind whispering that I should return, that I should go to them, whoever or whatever they are. My name is Kevin. I'm 39 years old, and I work as an emergency room nurse in Victoria, which means I'm used to chaos, to making quick decisions under pressure, to seeing things that don't quite add up and trusting my instincts. But what happened on a 3-day December cruise around Vancouver Island aboard the Pacific Wanderer has made me question whether those instincts are reliable, or if I experienced something that defies rational explanation. I picked up the booking last minute, December 18th through 20th. One of those too good to be true deals that cruise lines offer in the off-season when tourism in the Pacific Northwest drops to almost nothing. Advertised as 70% off regular pricing for a quick loop around Vancouver Island through Johnstone Strait and down the west coast. I'd unexpectedly gotten 3 days off when another nurse covered my shifts, my first real break in 8 months. And the idea of a quiet cruise on an empty ship sounded perfect. No crowds, no lines, just me and the Pacific Northwest winter scenery. When I boarded in Victoria on the afternoon of December 18th, the ship felt cavernous and empty. The Pacific Wanderer is designed to carry maybe 500 passengers, but the crew member at check-in mentioned they only had about 50 guests for this sailing, which explained the discount. I was actually excited about that, having restaurants and lounges mostly to myself, being able to pick any spot on the observation decks without fighting for space. The kind of solitary relaxation that's impossible during peak season. My cabin was on Deck 5, a standard interior room that was clean and functional. And after unpacking, I went up to the Lido deck to watch us depart Victoria Harbor around 5 p.m. The first evening was exactly what I'd hoped for. I had dinner in the main dining room, where maybe 10 other passengers were scattered across tables, enjoyed decent salmon and wine, then spent an hour in the observation lounge watching the lights of Vancouver Island fade into darkness as we headed north. The crew was friendly, maybe a bit too attentive given how few guests there were. I counted at least 3 servers hovering around the dining room for the handful of us eating. But I figured they were just bored and appreciated the company. I went to bed around 10:00 p.m., feeling relaxed for the first time in months. The ship's gentle rocking and the white noise of the engines creating perfect sleeping conditions. December 19th, I woke up around 7:30 a.m. and went to the breakfast buffet on Deck 8. And that's when I first noticed something that didn't quite fit. There was a couple at a table near the windows, maybe in their 60s, wearing matching blue windbreakers. And I nodded at them as I got my coffee. I took my breakfast to a different table, spent maybe 20 minutes eating and looking at my phone, then went up to Deck 10 to walk around the outdoor promenade. And the same couple in matching blue windbreakers were standing at the railing looking at the water. It struck me as odd because I'd just seen them in the dining room on Deck 8. And to get to Deck 10, they would have had to pass me either on the stairs or elevator. But I hadn't seen them move. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I must have taken longer at breakfast than I realized, or they'd taken a different route, or I simply hadn't noticed them pass. But the feeling of wrongness stuck with me. I spent the morning exploring the ship, which was a strange experience because most areas were completely empty. I walked through the casino and it was deserted, machines off, tables covered, walked through the shops and they were closed despite posted hours saying they should be open. Around 11:00 a.m., I went to the library on Deck 3, a small room with comfortable chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows, and there was a child there, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the floor playing with a tablet. I sat down with a book I'd brought, read for maybe 30 minutes, then decided to get lunch and headed to the Lido deck buffet on Deck 8. And the same child was there, still on a tablet, sitting at a table near the dessert station. I stopped and stared because I'd just seen this kid on Deck 3, 5 levels below. And there was no way he could have gotten up here ahead of me. I'd taken the direct route, hadn't stopped anywhere. I approached the child and asked if he was okay, if his parents were around. And he looked up at me with this blank expression and didn't respond. Just looked back down at his tablet. When you start seeing the same people in places they physically couldn't have reached. Do you trust your memory or your eyes? I started paying closer attention after that, actively counting and tracking the passengers I saw. And by mid-afternoon, I'd identified what appeared to be 6 distinct individuals. The couple in blue windbreakers, the child with the tablet, an elderly woman with a red scarf, a man in his 40s with a beard, and a young woman with long black hair. But here's what didn't make sense. The crew had said there were 50 passengers aboard, yet I could only ever verify these 6 people. And they seemed to be everywhere, simultaneously, in multiple locations at once, filling the ship with presence despite the tiny actual number. That evening at dinner, I was seated at my usual table, and I looked around the dining room more carefully, counted 7 other occupied tables with passengers. But when I actually focused on each table, I saw the same 6 people I'd identified earlier, just arranged differently. The couple in blue windbreakers at one table, the bearded man and the young woman at another, the elderly woman with the child. I took out my phone and discreetly photographed the dining room, just a casual shot like I was documenting the cruise. And when I reviewed the photo later in my cabin, I felt my stomach drop because the background showed crowds, dozens of people, full tables, bustling dining room. But I knew for certain that's not what I'd seen when I took the picture. I went back through all the photos I'd taken since boarding, shots of the observation lounge, the promenade deck, the atrium, and every single one showed crowds in the background, passengers that I had no memory of seeing, faces and bodies filling spaces that I clearly remembered as empty. I told myself the camera was malfunctioning, that there was some digital glitch adding artifacts to my photos. But the images were too clear, too detailed, too real. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept thinking about those 6 passengers and the impossible mathematics of their movements. Kept reviewing my photos and trying to reconcile what I had seen with what the camera had captured. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and went out to the promenade deck, thought fresh air might help. And as I walked around the exterior of the ship, I looked through windows into the interior corridors and saw them, all 6 passengers, walking in formation through a hallway on deck 6, moving in perfect synchronization, like a choreographed performance. The next morning, December 20th, our final day before returning to Victoria, I decided to confront the situation directly, went to the purser's desk and asked to speak with someone about the passenger count. The crew member, a woman maybe in her 50s, smiled pleasantly and confirmed that yes, the ship was carrying 50 passengers this sailing, about 10% capacity, very unusual, but not unheard of for December in the Pacific Northwest. I asked if I could see a passenger manifest, said I was curious about the demographics of off-season cruisers, and her smile became fixed, less genuine, and she said that information was confidential for privacy reasons. I pressed, said I'd been walking around the ship and had only seen maybe 6 or 7 other passengers total. Was that normal? Did people just stay in their cabins all day? Her expression changed completely, became guarded, and she said that passenger counts were verified at muster drills and that she couldn't discuss specific guest behaviors. I asked when the muster drill had been, because I hadn't attended one, hadn't been notified of one, and she paused too long before saying it had been conducted during boarding for this short cruise. I spent the next 3 hours methodically searching the ship, deck by deck, checking every public space, every corridor, trying to find the other 44 passengers who supposedly existed. The pools were empty, the gym was empty, the movie theater was empty, the multiple lounges and bars were empty except for bored-looking crew members. I tried cabin doors on my deck, found most of them locked, but the few I could see through peepholes appeared empty. No personal items, no signs of occupation. Around 3 p.m., I requested a meeting with the captain, told the crew member at the bridge entrance that I needed to discuss a safety concern. He made a call, waited, then escorted me to the captain's office, where a man in his 50s in a white uniform sat behind a desk covered with charts and paperwork. I explained my concerns as calmly as I could, said that I'd been unable to verify the passenger count I'd been told, that something felt wrong about the ship's occupancy, that I was seeing the same handful of people in impossible locations. The captain listened without interrupting, his face impassive, and when I finished, he asked me how I was feeling, if I was experiencing any dizziness or disorientation, if I'd been drinking. I insisted I was completely sober and mentally sound, that this wasn't about my perception, but about observable reality. He became agitated, said that the ship's operations were not subject to passenger investigation, that if I continued to harass crew members or disturb other guests, I would be confined to my cabin for the remainder of the voyage. I argued that I had a right to know how many people were actually on board, that safety regulations require accurate passenger counts. And he stood up and called security. 2 crew members appeared within minutes and escorted me back to my cabin, told me I was being confined there for my own safety and the comfort of other passengers, until we docked in Victoria the next morning. They positioned someone outside my door. I could hear them moving around in the corridor. And I spent that final night trapped in my cabin, reviewing my photos, counting and recounting the faces, and wondering if I was losing my mind. We docked in Victoria on the morning of December 21st, and I was escorted off the ship by security before regular disembarkation began. Walked down the gangway with my bag while crew members watched to make sure I left. I immediately tried to file a complaint with the cruise line's customer service, but they wouldn't return my calls, sent automated email responses saying my concerns had been noted. I pulled up my credit card statement and my stomach dropped again because I'd been charged $1,847, not the discounted rate I'd seen advertised, but the full single occupancy fare for a December cruise. I started searching online for reviews of Pacific Northwest off-season cruises, looking for anyone else who'd reported similar experiences. What I found made my hands shake. Scattered across different forums and review sites were accounts from other passengers who'd taken December or January cruises around Vancouver Island, describing nearly empty ships, seeing the same passengers in multiple locations, photos showing crowds that weren't there, crew members becoming hostile when questioned about passenger counts. One review from 2 years ago used the phrase "ghost passengers" and described an identical experience to mine, including being confined to cabin for the final night. I've tried to report it to maritime authorities, but they say without specific safety violations, there's nothing to investigate, that cruise lines have the right to sail with whatever capacity they choose. I've shown my photos to people who work in digital imaging, and they confirm the images haven't been manipulated, that whatever I photographed was actually there when I took the pictures. I've contacted other passengers from those online reviews, but most don't respond. And the ones who do say they prefer not to discuss it, that they just want to forget the experience. I still don't know if the Pacific Wanderer was actually carrying 50 passengers, or if the cruise line was staging fake passengers to justify running routes that would otherwise be canceled. I don't know if what I saw was some kind of mass hallucination, or if those 6 people were real, and the camera somehow captured something that existed in a different frequency than my perception. What I do know is that I was charged full price for a discount cruise, that I was physically confined for asking questions, and that somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, waters cruise ships are sailing with occupancy numbers that don't match reality. And the companies running them don't want anyone looking too closely at who or what is actually aboard.